Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the dust-tinted light of a West African capital that once thrummed with hammer blows and the steady rhythm of artisans at their benches. You're not trudging into a grand coliseum or storming some battlefield. No, you're shuffling down a sun-baked street where the real drama is molten, glowing, and somehow strangely sleepy. Bronze casting in Benin isn't about rushing or conquering. It's about the slow patience of fire and clay, and you, lucky listener, get to drift right into the middle of it. The scent of charcoal clings to your clothes. The sound of children practicing with wax echo like a lullaby. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week of this constant heat and smoke. But don't worry, you're only here in imagination, wrapped in a blanket instead of a work apron. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander toward the heart of Benin City. The ground underfoot is red, clay-rich earth, the same kind of soil that later will cradle clay molds and drink in spilled bronze. Dust coats your ankles as you walk past rows of houses made from mud walls and thatched roofs. The hum of the city is not frantic. It's steady, deliberate, like the breath of someone who knows they had time. You catch glimpses of women stirring pots of yam porridge, children chasing each other with reed toys, and traders laying out cowrie shells like poker chips on woven mats. Above it all looms a palace complex, its walls rising high, ringed by ditches so wide that early Portuguese visitors claimed they rival the works of pharaohs. Historians still argue whether those earthworks truly stretch longer than the Great Wall of China, but you can almost feel the enormity pressing in, layer after layer of packed clay towering, not for military aggression, but to remind you of authority. You step into its shadow, and everything feels hushed. At the gates, you see carved wooden posts depicting leopards and crocodiles, beasts you'd rather not meet in the bush. Their polished surfaces gleam faintly, even in the dimming light. And you realize the city has an obsession with shining surfaces, with metal that catches the eye and freezes memory in gleaming relief. Bronze is not just craft here. It is language, history, prayer, and flattery rolled into one glittering package. As you edge deeper into the palace district, the smells change. Less yam stew, more charcoal smoke. You catch a cough in your throat, the sharp edge of smelted copper burning the air. A boy no older than 12 scurries past, his arms full of wax rods, sticky and pliable in the heat. He's barefoot, his toes coated in dust, and he doesn't seem to notice the discomfort. His face is determined in that way only apprentices can manage. Half excitement, half exhaustion. One joke floats through your mind. It's a 16th century version of an unpaid internship, except here you also get soot in your nose and probably no coffee breaks. Turning a corner, you finally spot them, the bronze casters. They're not tucked away in some glamorous workshop, but huddled in a compound, working beneath open-air shelters. Their hands are blackened, their eyes narrowed against sparks, yet their motions are unhurried. They roll wax, press designs, smooth clay over forms, as if the whole world could wait for them to finish a single leopard head. Mainstream fact. The casters belong to a hereditary guild, the Eigenaramwin, bound directly to the Oba, the king. Only they could create bronzes for the court, and their skills passed down from father to son like a sacred trust. Fringe tidbit. Some believe that if a caster broke the guild's rules, the molten metal itself would betray him, bubbling too quickly or splattering disastrously, as though the alloy had its own moral compass. That's one performance review you definitely don't want. The heat thickens around you, not hostile but insistent, like a heavy blanket you can't quite shake off. You watch a man bend over a small furnace, bellows pumping, flames licking high. Copper gleams, brass glows, and somewhere in the din, a child laughs because someone's goat has wandered too close and stolen a discarded plantain peel. The laughter cuts through the work's seriousness, reminding you that this city is alive with more than molten metal. Someone nudges you toward the center of the compound, where larger molds are arranged like sleeping animals. Hulking, lumpy things of clay and ash. You're told not to touch them. They might look inert, but inside, wax waits, shapes of oba portraits or leopards poised to be reborn in bronze. You lean closer anyway, curious, and the air tastes of earth and fire. Historians still argue whether the techniques used here, the lost wax method, were imported through contact with Ife, another Yoruba center of artistry, or developed uniquely within Benin. The debate loops on, with one side claiming cross-pollination, the other defending pure originality. You, however, just see smoke curling upward, carry with its centuries of pride and patience. A rooster crows somewhere behind you, confused about the time, and you chuckle. Maybe it's joining the soundtrack of hammers and chatter. Maybe even roosters appreciate the endless rhythm of molten metal. And as you stand there, watching the glow flicker against faces lined with soot and concentration, you begin to understand. This is a frantic race to complete a piece. It's a long, slow dialogue between fire, earth, and human will. It's soothing in its own way, like watching someone slowly fold laundry or stir a pot. Except here, instead of socks or soup, you end up with a bronze leopard ready to stare down centuries. You take a breath, let the heat settle into your bones, and step a little further into the heart of Benin's craft. You trudge along the wide path that skirts the palace walls, and the sheer scale of these earthen fortifications begins to sink in. The walls themselves are not the pale, chalky-colored European castles you might imagine. They are deep, rust-red clay, layered in painstaking ridges. You can almost hear the echoes of hands patting, smoothing, and piling mud over generations, an unbroken rhythm of human labor that stretches back hundreds of years. Children play along the embankments, chasing each other, kicking dust into the warm afternoon air. Somewhere a dog barks, its sound bouncing off the walls, joining the gentle percussion of the city itself. You probably won't survive a day building this by hand, but in your imagination, you can at least stroll alongside it, marveling at the ambition that motivated every layer. So, before you get comfortable, remember to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you haven't yet, drop your location and the local time in the comments, because honestly, it's fun to imagine exactly when this lullaby is being heard around the globe. The palace walls are not merely defensive, they are symbolic. Each tier represents authority, tradition, and the Oba's sacred presence. Historians still argue whether the design prioritized military strategy or display political power, but either way, the effect is undeniable. You feel small and patient in its shadow, your footsteps muted against the soft red earth. From here, the city seems to pulse around the walls, smoke rising from cooking fires, the faint metallic glint of bronze plaques glimpsed on workshop shelves, and the distant clatter of hammered metal as casters continue their steady work. Inside the palace complex, everything moves in slow, deliberate cadence. Courtyards are filled with activity, but there's no rush. You can hear the faint ringing of a hammer on bronze in the distance, a high, musical ping that makes you tilt your head and almost nod in time. It's mesmerizing, like a metronome set to centuries-old rhythms. You notice guards walking along the walls with spears tipped in polished metal, their footsteps echoing softly. They are statuesque yet relaxed, not in a hurry, yet every movement deliberate, a subtle choreography of vigilance. As you round a corner, you catch your first glimpse of craftsmen's tools laid out neatly on benches. Hammers of varying sizes, tongs that have been darkened by fire, chisels that gleam faintly despite years of use. The air smells faintly of bronze, mixed with the earthy scent of clay and the sharp tang of fire. You lean in slightly, squinting at the tools, imagining precise hand movements that have shaped plaques and figures for generations. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that humming a certain tune while hammering prevented the metal from getting grumpy and cracking mid-shape. You smile because it seems ridiculous, but then again, maybe it worked. Children continue to dash around the edges of the palace, some carrying small bundles of wax or clay for practice. They pause to watch the casters at work, wide-eyed, their own future roles already hinted at in posture and expression. Mainstream fact, membership in the Eigeneronwin Guild was strictly hereditary. Only boys born into casting families could apprentice formally, ensuring that the techniques, secrets, and sacred knowledge remain within a controlled lineage. Historians still argue whether this strict exclusivity limited innovation or preserved a level of mastery unmatched anywhere else. You shrug, letting the question float in your mind as you continue strolling, almost lulled by the rhythm of activity. You notice now the interplay of sunlight and shadow across the walls. Some sections gleam in gold-red light, highlighting the careful layering of mud, while others sink into deeper shadows where the walls curve and bend. Every indentation and ridge seems purposeful, though you know much of it was simply the product of repeated handwork over generations. There's a slow, almost hypnotic quality to watching these walls, as if they are breathing along with the city. You let your eyes wander over them, tracing the contours, imagining yourself a small apprentice someday pounding clay alongside seasoned masters. You follow the path further, catching glimpses of ceremonial spaces within the palace. Mats are laid out in patterns that almost look like constellations, and low drums sit idly nearby, waiting for the right moment to mark announcements or rites. Occasionally, a faint drumbeat resonates from within, though you can't see the player. It adds another layer to the ambient rhythm of the palace, a heartbeat beneath the visible activity. Fringe tidbit. Some elders whisper that the walls themselves absorb music, carrying subtle vibrations that could influence the drying of clay or the flow of molten bronze. You chuckle softly because imagining walls humming along is oddly comforting. Passing through a quieter corridor, you notice a few women seated on low stools, carefully sorting cowrie shells and small beads. These might seem mundane compared to molten metal, but you sense the precision involved, the same patience mirrored in bronze casting. Every task, no matter how small, seems designed to instill rhythm, focus, and diligence. Historians still argue whether women's indirect participation in palace craft significantly influenced the outcome of artworks, or if it remained largely auxiliary. You decide it doesn't matter for now. You're more interested in the serene choreography of daily life. You wander toward the outer wall, where children and apprentices have created a small playground of sorts from spare wood, clay lumps, and discarded molds. Laughter rings out, a gentle counterpoint to the steady hammering of bronze inside the compound. You notice one boy balancing a small clay leopard on his head, giggling as another tries to snatch it. The scene is absurd yet charming, a reminder that even in spaces devoted to ritual and precision, life finds room for play. Mainstream fact. Apprentices often began their training with small, almost comically simple tasks, like pressing basic patterns into wax, before ever approaching molten metal. The slow build-up was essential to their development. You pause to sit on a low step, feeling the heat radiate from sun-baked clay beneath you. Somewhere a bird calls lazily, and the palace walls stand solid and patient. You realize that the city itself seems designed to slow the observer, to encourage deep breathing, careful watching, and reflective wandering. The rhythm of life here, from walls to workshops to children playing, is gentle but persistent. It is, in a way, a perfect lullaby for anyone willing to lose themselves in its cadence. You drift closer to the workshops where bronze is actually born, and suddenly the world narrows to the clinking, hissing, glowing heart of the craft. Smoke curls lazily from small, open-air furnaces, twisting upward and catching in the afternoon sunlight, giving the impression that the air itself is alive with molten possibility. You take a slow breath and let the faint tang of copper fill your nostrils, part metallic, part earthy, and just a touch acrid. Fringe tidbit. Some locals claim that if you inhale the fumes long enough, you might smell history, though you suspect it's more legend than reality, or maybe just a poetic way to describe the city's atmosphere. Regardless, the scent is oddly soothing, a reminder that creation is slow, smelly, and mesmerizing all at once. So, before you get fully absorbed, remember to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to leave your location and local time. It's oddly comforting to imagine someone else breathing in this smoky lullaby across the globe. You watch as a man crouches over a furnace, tongs in hand, coaxing a molten copper tin alloy into readiness. The metal gleams like liquid gold, glowing so brightly that you instinctively shade your eyes, even though the sun is already dimming. It's a simple, hypnotic act. Lift, tilt, pour, and then wait. Mainstream fact. The Benin casters employed the lost wax technique, in which a wax model is coated in clay and then melted away by the very bronze poured in its place, leaving an exact metal replica. Historians still argue whether this method was fully indigenous or borrowed from earlier Ife traditions, though most agree the Benin execution elevated to an unparalleled level of artistry. Nearby, A boy nervously presses wax into a small mold, smudging a delicate leopard spots. You chuckle softly because he looks exactly like every apprentice you've ever seen in a learning by doing montage. Hands sticky, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. There's a rhythm here, a steady heartbeat of work, as if time itself bends to the pace of the caster's patience. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that humming quietly while working encouraged the wax to behave, though whether it really helped is up for debate. You smile anyway. It's nice to imagine that music could guide molten metal centuries before Spotify playlists. The glow from the furnaces highlights the faces of the casters, wrinkled, soot-streaked, and calm. You notice the meticulous care with which they handle each tool, each rod of bronze, each mold. Their movements are deliberate, almost meditative. They are creating not just art, but history, piece by piece, day by day. Mainstream fact. Bronze plaques often depicted royal ceremonies, leopard motifs, or ancestral figures, and served both decorative and documentary purposes within the palace. Historians still argue whether certain designs were purely symbolic or held secret ritual significance that only guild members fully understood. You decide to let that question drift, as the rhythmic tapping and swirling smoke draw you further into a gentle trance. A small breeze wafts through, carrying with it a mixture of scents. Wet clay from recently molded forms, faint traces of oil used to lubricate tools, and the earthy smell of soot and charred wood. You squint into the light and notice tiny details, an almost imperceptible shimmer on a new plaque, a small crack in a mold carefully patched, a wax leopard whose ears look just a bit mischievous. You feel like you've stumbled into a hidden theater where actors are replaced by metals and molds, and the performance unfolds over weeks, not minutes. A playful moment catches your attention. A young apprentice accidentally tips over a small wax model. It lands on the edge of a bench with a soft thud, and the master's stern glance is quickly softened by a chuckle. You realize that humor and patience are intertwined here. The craft demands focus, but human heartbeat keeps the tempo from turning into a mechanical grind. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members reportedly whispered that laughter while working improved the flow of bronze, though you suspect this is more charming folklore than chemical fact. Still, the notion of happy metal is oddly comforting as you lean back, letting the warmth from the furnaces soak into your shoulders. Across the courtyard, a few more apprentices are rolling wax sheets for plaques. The wax is soft and pliable, almost alive in their hands. Every fold, every imprint, every careful smoothing is an exercise in patience. You notice tiny fingerprints embedded in the wax, invisible once cast in bronze, yet tangible to you now as a reminder of the human touch behind the brilliance. Mainstream fact. The guild maintains strict apprenticeship structures, and mistakes could delay production by weeks, emphasizing precision over speed. Historians still argue whether the strict hierarchy stifled creativity or ensured the unmatched quality of Benin bronzes, but either way, you can't help admiring the dedication. In the background, children chase each other, their laughter blending with the faint clinking of hammers. You notice a small fire pit where a pot simmers, and the aroma of roasted yams momentarily distracts you from the hypnotic dance of molten metal. The entire scene is a balance of intensity and leisure, of art and daily life, and you feel oddly cocooned in it. A soft, metallic lullaby. You can almost hear a voice whispering, "Patience, patience. Let the bronze tell its story." And somehow, you're inclined to agree. You wander deeper into the compound, where the youngest apprentices are busy pounding and shaping wax with wooden tools that look far too large for their small hands. The noise is rhythmic, a soft percussion that blends with the occasional hiss of furnaces and distant laughter from the courtyard. You trudge slowly, absorbing the cadence, letting your shoulders sink into the gentle heat and ambient clamor. Fringe tidbit. Some elders claim that the first apprentice to successfully complete a wax leopard without cracking it was said to earn a watchful spirit, a playful superstition meant to encourage patience. You smile at the idea. It's like giving out invisible medals for doing exactly what you're supposed to do. So, before you settle further, remember the ritual, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of slow, smoky journey into history. And don't forget to leave your location and local time. Imagining fellow listeners drifting to sleep across the globe adds a soft collective heartbeat to this narrative. You observe as boys and girls work in small clusters. Each apprentice has a dedicated station. A slab of clay, a bundle of wax rods, and a small, soot-darkened tool. Mainstream fact. Apprentices typically began training between ages 7 and 10 and spent years mastering the fundamentals of lost wax modeling before touching molten bronze. Historians still argue whether the early start gave them an advantage or simply prolonged inevitable mistakes, but you notice a kind of quiet genius in the repetition. Every fold, pinch, and stroke teaches a lesson that words alone cannot convey. The wax figures take shape gradually. Leopards stretch on tiny clay bases. Human faces peer from the pliable medium, and decorative motifs begin to hint at the rich symbolism that will soon be frozen in bronze. You reach out instinctively to touch one, then remember that molten metal awaits its transformation. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believed whispering to the wax helped it listen to the master's intentions, an odd mix of magic and mindfulness that seems surprisingly practical when patience is everything. You murmur along anyway, just to feel included. You watch a small boy meticulously adding ears to a leopard figure. His fingers are sticky with wax, yet his movements are careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The master casts a slow glance over his shoulder, correcting angles and guiding proportions, but never rushing, never scolding harshly. Mainstream fact. The guild's hierarchy emphasized mentorship over punishment, with masters teaching subtle techniques orally and through demonstration. Historians still argue whether this oral tradition preserved technique better than written instructions would have. But the results, the gleaming bronzes, speak for themselves. Nearby, another apprentice is shaping a human figure meant to represent the Oba's council. You notice a slight tremor as he presses a wax into place, a reminder that even the smallest error could have outsized consequences once bronze flows into the mold. The air smells faintly sweet from the resin mixed into the wax, and a breeze brings in a faint aroma of smoke from the kilns where molds are hardening. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices chewed certain leaves to keep their hands supple and prevent wax from sticking too aggressively. You try to picture this strange, leafy ritual and can't help chuckling softly. Everywhere you look, the compound hums with diligence and quiet energy. A faint clatter in the distance reminds you of hammers on metal plaques, while the rhythmic scraping of wax on clay offers a counterpoint. Children occasionally drop wax rods, laugh, and retrieve them, infusing playfulness into the serious atmosphere. You almost feel lulled by the gentle alternation of activity and pause, a soft lullaby woven from concentration, skill, and patience. You notice that each apprentice's station is adorned with small charms and personal trinkets, perhaps a carved animal, a tiny bracelet, or a smooth stone. These are not mere decoration. Fringe tidbit. Many casters believe such object protected against miscast molds or bad luck in the bronze pour. Mainstream fact. Protective charms were common in the guild, intertwined with spiritual and ritual practices, highlighting the deep cultural significance of their craft. Historians still argue whether these objects truly influenced outcomes or merely served as psychological reassurance, but their presence undeniably added to the meditative environment. In a quieter corner, you glimpse an older apprentice instructing a younger one on smoothing out imperfections in wax. The older child moves slowly, demonstrating patience and control, while the younger mimics with exaggerated care. You realize that this is as much a social education as it is a craft lesson. Observation, mimicry, and gentle correction build the next generation of casters, reinforcing values of precision, patience, and reverence for the craft. Fringe tidbit. Some whisper that watching a master at work could transfer skill through osmosis alone. Though scientifically dubious, the metaphor captures the immersive nature of the apprenticeship. As the sun dips lower, the courtyard shadows lengthen, draping over wax models, tools, and small clay kilns. You lean back slightly, letting the gentle clamor wash over you. Every movement, sound, and scent is a thread in the tapestry of bronze casting, a slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic rhythm. Mainstream fact. Apprentices spent years perfecting wax models because any error could ruin a costly bronze cast. Historians still argue whether this extreme emphasis on patience discouraged experimentation, but you're too relaxed to care. You just enjoy the hypnotic rhythm. You notice for a moment the subtle humor embedded in the daily routines. A wax leopard with lopsided ears, a boy sneezing and smudging a pattern, a small dog wandering to the courtyard without consequence. Life, even in such a disciplined setting, retains its quirks, and you smile, feeling the gentle juxtaposition of diligence and play. The compound teaches you something essential. Mastery takes time and patience. Endless patience is part of the charm. You lean closer to the tables where wax figures slowly begin to reveal themselves. The soft, buttery shapes shimmer under the afternoon sun, catching tiny reflections from the clay mold stacked nearby. You notice the delicate lines etched into a leopard's spots, the tiny creases around a miniature human figure's elbows, and the way some wax figures seem almost alive despite being so fragile. Fringe tidbit. Some casters believe that if the wax figure wobbled while being shaped, it was a sign the spirit of the animal or person would inhabit the bronze after casting. You grin at the notion, imagining tiny spirits nudging the molten metal into cooperation. Before your mind wanders, take a deep breath and remember the ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this slow, reflective drift into history. Share your location and local time too. It's fun to imagine other listeners tracing the same bronze path at this exact hour. You watch an apprentice carefully roll wax over a small clay model of an Oba's ceremonial leopard. Mainstream fact. The lost wax process required not only technical skill but profound understanding of materials, temperature, and timing. Historians still argue whether each guild member adhered strictly to standard proportions or whether personal flair subtly altered designs across generations. The boy's fingers press and smooth, the wax yielding to his touch with a pliability that almost feels sentient. Nearby, another apprentice delicately adds intricate patterns to a human figure intended to represent a palace noble. Fringe tidbit. Sometimes, apprentices would inscribe small hidden jokes or personal marks into the wax, a subtle signature only visible to the most observant. You lean in to catch one, a tiny smiling face etched on the back of his shoulder, and chuckle softly, delighted at this tiny rebellion within the strict craft. You notice that every movement is deliberate, almost meditative. Fingers trace contours. Tools glide with soft rasping sounds over wax, and apprentices occasionally pause to admire a finished section. Mainstream fact. The guild emphasized patience above speed, believing that a hurried cast was more likely to fail. Historians still argue whether this slow approach was born of superstition, practicality, or both. But standing here, the method feels timeless and calming. A gentle breeze carries the aroma of molten metal mixed with resin and earth. You inhale slowly, letting the scents layer in your senses. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that adding a specific leaf to the wax mixture would make it smoother and prevent cracking, though modern chemists debate the effectiveness. You smile, imagining the rituals and little superstitions intertwined with centuries of craftsmanship. In one corner, a master casts a vigilant eye over several apprentices, guiding hands without ever raising his voice. You watch as he lightly taps a wax surface, instructing with gestures more than words. Mainstream fact. Verbal instruction was minimal. Observation, mimicry, and gentle correction were considered more effective teaching tools. Historians still argue whether this reliance on observation limited the spread of knowledge beyond guild families, but certainly ensured quality. You notice a child accidentally nudging a wax figure, nearly toppling it. The master sighs, gently righting it, and everyone resumes their rhythm as if nothing happened. Fringe tidbit. Minor accidents were sometimes interpreted as playful warnings from spirits that the day's work required more care. You laugh quietly. The balance of superstition and skill makes the courtyard feel alive in subtle ways. Sunlight filters through the roof sections of the workshop, casting dappled patterns across the wax and clay. Each glimmering reflection reminds you that patience is rewarded with beauty. Mainstream fact. Bronze plaques often took weeks or months from wax modeling to final polishing. Historians still argue whether the symbolic significance of certain motifs, leopards, birds, human figures, varied by guild or commission, but every detail mattered deeply. A low, rhythmic tapping from hammers on distant bronze sheets joins the soft scraping of wax here. You almost feel lulled by the alternating sounds, as if the city itself is breathing with artisans. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that humming while working steadied their hands, and though the effectiveness is doubtful, it adds to the meditative quality of their environment. You hum quietly along, letting the sound sink into your bones. You lean back, observing the young casters, their focused faces and sticky fingers, the slight imperfections that will soon vanish in molten glory. Each wax figure is a promise, a precursor to metal that will endure centuries. Mainstream fact: the unwind Guild passed these techniques down through generations, ensuring continuity of style and skill. Historians still argue whether minor stylistic variations were intentional or simply artifacts of individual temperament. But here, in this gentle courtyard, you feel the calm discipline that underpins it all. You let your eyes wander across the workspace, noting small moments of humor. A misplaced wax tail, a giggling apprentice, a tool that slips just slightly. Life persists even in intense focus, and you feel a kind of serenity in this blend of diligence and lightheartedness. You notice how slow, patient movements seem to ripple outward, influencing the tempo of everyone around. This isn't just work. It's an orchestrated meditation, a quiet rhythm that invites you to exhale, slow down, and simply be present. You shift your attention to the rows of clay molds drying nearby, feeling the heat radiating gently from them. Each mold is a hollow chamber, a silent promise waiting to be filled with molten bronze. You notice the slight sheen on some surfaces where moisture is still evaporating, the faint cracks here and there that have been carefully patched with extra clay. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices whisper that the molds sweat when ready, a subtle moisture that indicated perfect heat retention, though modern observers might just call it condensation. You breathe it in anyway, letting the warmth and earthy scent lull you further into the rhythm of the workshop. Before your thoughts wander too far, remember to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting through these historical moments. Share your location and local time in the comments, so you and other listeners can feel connected across space and centuries. The clay molds are fascinating to observe because of their duality. Fragile in appearance, yet designed to contain metal at nearly 1,100 degrees Celsius. Mainstream fact: the lost wax technique relied on precisely dried molds to prevent cracking during the pour, making the preparation stage just as crucial as the actual casting. Historians still argue whether some molds were intentionally overbuilt for symbolic protection or purely functional reasons, but either interpretation adds to the richness of understanding. You watch an apprentice carefully applying a thin layer of clay over a wax leopard, smoothing every curve and contour. The motion is repetitive yet hypnotic, almost like a gentle chant in physical form. Fringe tidbit: older casters would sometimes whisper protective phrases over molds, believing words could guard against mishaps in the pour. You smile at the combination of superstition and craftsmanship, imagining words floating invisibly above these silent clay forms. Nearby, another apprentice is shaping the interior channels for molten metal. You lean closer to see the tiny tunnels carved into clay, designed to ensure bronze flows evenly into every corner of the model. Mainstream fact: these sprues and vents were critical for the lost wax method, allowing air to escape and metal to fill intricate details. Historians still argue whether certain guilds preferred specific channeling patterns for aesthetic reasons or purely for engineering precision, and you find the debate strangely soothing in its complexity. The sun casts a warm glow over the molds, highlighting their textures and subtle imperfections. You notice slight ridges where fingers smooth clay, little fingerprints that will never appear in the final bronze. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices deliberately left tiny marks as hidden signatures, a secret they would only reveal to the most attentive masters. You chuckle, imagining centuries later someone discovering these tiny, mischievous traces embedded in a gleaming leopard or plaque. You notice the interaction between the molds and the surrounding environment. Birds occasionally land on unused molds, pecking lightly at the hardened clay without damage. Small children weave between the drying forms, careful to avoid accidents, their movements contributing to a gentle, chaotic choreography. Mainstream fact: careful placement and spacing of molds was essential to prevent premature cracking, collapse, or contamination. Historians still argue whether the sequence of drying had symbolic meaning beyond practicality, perhaps aligning with spiritual timing or palace rituals. Across the compound, Masters supervise quietly, rarely intervening unless a problem arises. You see an older caster kneeling beside a mold, brushing away dust and debris with a small feather. Fringe tidbit. Some artisans claim that using a feather borrowed from a local bird brought luck to the casting process, particularly for human or royal figures. You smile, noting that patience is not merely mechanical here. It's entwined with belief, attention, and a quiet reverence for the craft. The air carries the faint tang of baking clay, mixed with smoke from furnaces. You inhale, letting it settle in your chest. Every element in this courtyard, the molds, the apprentices, the gentle hum of work, is part of an unspoken rhythm. Mainstream fact. Drying molds could take days, sometimes even weeks, depending on size and ambient conditions. Historians still argue whether certain seasonal variations were deliberately used to influence the hardness or finish of the bronze, adding an almost mystical element to technical preparation. A playful moment occurs when a small apprentice accidentally nudges a wedge-shaped mold, and a soft clatter reverberates through the courtyard. The boy freezes, but the master only smiles faintly, guiding him back into alignment. Fringe tidbit. Mishaps like these were often incorporated into oral lessons later, reminding all apprentices that accidents are part of mastery, not punishment. You note this with mild amusement, feeling a warmth at the human softness beneath the disciplined exterior of the guild. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, shadows stretch across the molds, casting gentle patterns on the red earth. You feel your own pulse slow, your attention absorbed in the shapes and textures. The quiet patience of this preparation stage, the careful layering, the smoothing, the slow drying, is almost meditative. Mainstream fact. This patience ensured that when bronze finally poured into the molds, the result was flawless. Historians still argue whether the tactile and visual cues used by apprentices were scientifically necessary or a cultivated cultural ritual, but in this gentle moment, the difference doesn't matter. You lean back, letting the warmth of the drying molds, the faint smoke, and the soft clatter tools settle into your awareness. Life in this courtyard feels deliberate, measured, and endlessly patient. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that listening to the molds sing as they dried helped them synchronize their work with the rhythm of the craft. You smile quietly, imagining tiny clay instruments humming softly as the sun dips further, and you allow yourself to drift with the rhythm, caught between attention and gentle relaxation. You shift closer to the section of the compound where the grand moment is about to unfold. The pour. Here, the air is charged with anticipation, though nothing is rushed. The furnaces glow like molten suns, casting flickering shadows across walls and faces. You notice a faint shimmer rising from a molten bronze, reflecting in the eyes of the casters as they prepare to tip the crucibles. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that whispering the name of the figure being cast into the metal itself ensured the spirit would recognize its form. You grin at the idea, imagining a leopard hearing its own name before solidifying into eternal bronze. Before you lean in further, remember the ritual, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the slow, immersive walk through history, and drop your location and local time. Somewhere out there, someone else is watching molten bronze swirl into molds right along with you. The pour is meticulous. Mainstream fact. Casters waited until the metal reached a precise temperature, often glowing orange red, to ensure that it flowed smoothly and filled every cavity without causing air bubbles. Historians still argue whether temperature measurement relied on experience alone or if rudimentary thermometers or colored flames were consulted, but in this courtyard, intuition rules. You can feel the tension in the air, a quiet hush among the apprentices and masters alike. A master lifts the heavy crucible, its weight steady in his hands, and positions it above the mold. You watch as molten bronze flows with liquid grace, filling every crevice, every contour, every delicate detail carved in wax. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices were often forbidden to watch the first few pours, as it was believed the intensity of the molten metal could shock the spirit. You chuckle because watching it now is mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, and certainly not shocking, at least for your modern sensibilities. The liquid metal hisses as it meets the clay, releasing a small plume of smoke. You notice tiny sparks scattering like fireflies across the surface, adding a whimsical quality to a process that is otherwise technical and disciplined. Mainstream fact: the hissing results from wax vaporizing and moisture in the clay escaping. Historians still argue whether the exact placement of vents and sprues was standardized or left to the caster's discretion, though the results speak for themselves. Smooth, precise bronze every time. Apprentices kneel nearby, watching intently. Some are gripping small tools, ready to adjust minor imperfections immediately after pour. Fringe tidbit: a few apprentices believe that singing a soft tune while the bronze cooled would soothe it, preventing cracking. You hum along silently, feeling oddly integrated into the centuries-old practice. The master tilts the crucible just slightly, letting the molten metal snake through channels carved in clay. You notice the precision required. Too fast and splashes could ruin the mold. Too slow, and the metal might harden prematurely. Mainstream fact: filling complex molds often took several minutes, and each pour can involve multiple crucibles for larger pieces. Historians still argue whether certain guilds favored incremental pouring over single pours for aesthetic reasons or for practical consistency, but watching it now, it seems like a careful dance more than a science experiment. A faint smell of heated metal mingles with the smoky tang of charcoal. You breathe it in deeply, letting the warm, metallic scent settle in your chest. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices believe that if they tasted the air near a pour, it would improve their sense of timing for future work. A curious mix of intuition and superstition. You smile quietly, not quite tempted, but appreciating the centuries of small, personalized rituals that make the craft human. As the molten bronze begins to cool, you notice the subtle color shift from bright orange to duller amber. Shadows stretch across the courtyard, and you see the apprentices relax ever so slightly, though their eyes remain fixed on the new creation. Mainstream fact: cooling times vary depending on size and complexity, sometimes taking several hours before molds could be handled safely. Historians still argue whether casters intentionally left minor imperfections as a signature or strictly aimed for flawless surfaces, but every step exudes patience. Nearby, children watch with wide eyes, occasionally mimicking the movements of the masters in playful imitation. Fringe tidbit: some elders joke that the children's plays serve as an aesthetic rehearsal for future apprentices, a humorous way to socialize them into guild rhythms. You chuckle softly, noticing the mixture of solemnity and levity that permeates the courtyard, a gentle reminder that even the weightiest tasks can contain tiny moments of joy. By the time the pour is complete, the bronze lies still and molten within the mold, a quiet promise waiting for its moment of revelation. You lean back, letting the glow from the crucibles wash over your face, and feel yourself gently lulled by the combination of heat, smell, sound, and human rhythm. Mainstream fact: once cooled, the molds will be broken carefully to reveal the bronze forms inside. Historians still argue whether early designs included subtle variations intended to distinguish the work of individual casters. But for now, you are content simply to watch patience and skill merge into gleaming metal. You step back and allow your eyes to wander over the courtyard now that the first pours have settled. The apprentices are moving gently, carrying away tools, brushing surfaces, and quietly inspecting molds, their movements deliberate and unhurried. The faint hum of activity continues, blending with distant laughter and the soft whisper of wind through nearby trees. Fringe tidbit: some casters believe that gentle hand gestures over the cool bronze encourage it to settle properly, an almost ritualistic care that balance skill with superstition. You smile, letting the calm rhythm of the courtyard wash over you. So, before you get fully absorbed in these details, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting slowly through history. And remember to share your location and local time. It's oddly comforting to think of others experiencing the same courtyard atmosphere as you do right now. You notice how each mold now carries a faint sheen from the cooling bronze. Mainstream fact: the cooling phase is crucial because uneven temperatures could cause cracks or warping, jeopardizing days or weeks of work. Historians still argue whether casters intuitively relied on touch and observation alone, or whether certain subtle cues from the metal itself guided adjustments. But the rhythm here seems almost meditative, as if time has slowed to match the pace of the artisans. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully chips away excess clay, revealing glimpses of solidifying bronze inside. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members insisted that the first sounds of cracking or crunching clay were a sign that the bronze was speaking, indicating whether it was happy or nervous. You chuckle softly, imagining a leopard telling you it prefers its ears in just the right position. You watch as another apprentice uses small chisels and brushes to refine details emerging from the molds. Mainstream fact. These post-casting adjustments were essential to preserve the intricate designs of human figures, leopards, and ceremonial scenes. Historians still argue whether these finishing touches were meant more for aesthetic perfection or for spiritual accuracy, as the guild considered every figure imbued with sacred significance. A gentle breeze brings a faint smell of clay and metal together, a comforting aroma that seems to pulse along with your slow breathing. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices would occasionally tap the bronze lightly, listening for a particular tone that indicated proper cooling. You imagine the courtyard as a gentle symphony of sounds, smells, and motion, each contributing to the meditative quality of the work. Children wander carefully around the molds, some helping carry small tools, others simply observing with wide eyes. You notice the quiet hierarchy at play. Older apprentices guide younger ones. Masters intervene only when necessary, and everyone moves with shared sense of purpose. Mainstream fact. This structured environment reinforced discipline, patience, and respect for both the craft and the spiritual significance of the works. Historians still argue whether the hierarchical system limited individual creativity, but here it seems to foster a gentle continuity. Across the courtyard, the sun begins its slow descent, casting long, soft shadows over ground. You watch how light interacts with the bronze, highlighting textures and subtle curves that weren't visible moments before. Fringe tidbit. Some artisans claim that observing the bronze in shifting sunlight helped them predict minor imperfections and plan corrective touches, a combination of art, intuition, and patience. You notice a master crouching beside a newly revealed bronze figure, brushing dust and residual clay carefully from every nook. His face is lined and soot-streaked, but his movements are gentle and precise. Mainstream fact. This final inspection was a critical step, ensuring that each piece met the exacting standards of the guild before being presented to the Oba. Historians still argue whether these meticulous processes were purely functional or carried hidden symbolic meanings, perhaps reflecting moral or spiritual principles of patience and care. A soft laugh echoes from the edge of the courtyard. A young apprentice accidentally knocks a small wax tail loose from a figure, and another helps reattach it. Fringe tidbit. Playful mishaps were often incorporated into oral lessons later, teaching apprentices not only skill, but also humility, patience, and humor. You lean back slightly, letting the gentle harmony of work and play settle into your awareness. The courtyard now feels like a breathing organism, hammers tapping gently, brushes sweeping lightly, children giggling, and wind rustling leaves overhead. You take a deep breath, letting the warmth, light, and rhythm wrap around you. Mainstream fact. Benin bronze casting was a centuries-old practice requiring precise attention to detail, passed from generation to generation within the Iganaramwan Guild. Historians still argue whether minor stylistic variations signaled individual artists or the result of evolving techniques. But standing here, observing the workflow, you feel the slow pulse of continuity, patience, and enduring craftsmanship. You wander toward the area where the newly cast bronze figures are being set aside to cool fully, the air carrying a mixture of warmth and faint metallic tang. The figures gleam subtly in the fading sunlight, their surfaces capturing hints of orange, red, and gold, as if the sun itself wanted to admire their craftsmanship. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices whisper that bronze remembered the hands that shaped it, holding tiny impressions of every touch, a poetic thought that made you smile as you imagined centuries-old fingerprints lingering invisibly in the metal. So, before you drift further into observation, remember the familiar refrain. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the serene voyage through history. And share your location and local time, because somewhere else in the world, another listener might be watching these same bronzes slowly harden, sharing this quiet connection. You notice the meticulous care with which apprentices and masters handle the heavy pieces, lifting them onto low benches and carefully spacing them to allow even cooling. Mainstream fact. Uneven cooling could warp delicate details or cause microfractures, so spacing and gentle handling were essential. Historians still argue whether guilds developed specific cooling rituals or if this care was purely practical, but you can see the patience embedded in every movement. Nearby, a boy brushes residual clay from a newly revealed plaque depicting a ceremonial leopard hunt. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices sometimes believe that whispering to the figures during this stage ensured the spirit within would be happy and cooperative once installed in the palace. You chuckle softly, imagining bronze leopards approving or frowning at their post-cast polishing. A master glides along the benches, inspecting each figure for minor imperfections. Mainstream fact: post-casting finishing involved filing, sanding, and sometimes engraving subtle details lost during the bronze pour. Historians still argue whether these refinements were standardized across generations or reflected individual artistry. But each figure emerges flawless to the eye. The courtyard is alive with a quiet rhythm. Brushes sweep across surfaces. Small hammers tap lightly on loose clay, and children tiptoe around the cooling bronzes. Fringe tidbit. Some elders insisted that listening to hum of the cooling metal could predict its quality, a curious combination of superstition and observation that seems charmingly reasonable now. You notice the apprentice's subtle gestures of pride, barely perceptible but unmistakable. A slight nod, a careful step back to admire work, a soft exhale after completing a particularly intricate figure. Mainstream fact: these small accomplishments were key milestones in apprenticeship, reinforcing skill, patience, and confidence. Historians still argue whether these rituals were formalized or evolved naturally over generations, but the effect is clear in the measured, focused movements of the young casters. Sunlight is waning, casting long shadows that stretch across benches and walls. You watch the interplay of light and bronze, noting how the fading sun accentuates the delicate textures and raised patterns. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that the final hour of sunlight imbued the bronze with additional energy or approval from the spirits, a poetic notion that softens the hard edges of metalwork. Across the courtyard, a child accidentally drops a small tool, creating a gentle clatter. The sound is absorbed into the background rhythm of the workshop, barely disturbing the flow of activity. Mainstream fact: apprentices often learned as much from mistakes and accidents as from direct instruction, a system emphasizing resilience and observation. Historians still argue whether this informal learning was intentionally designed or simply a byproduct of communal work, but the gentle, almost playful environment suggests a harmonious balance. You take a deep breath, letting the warmth, smells, and quiet activities settle into your awareness. Fringe tidbit. Some casters swore that walking slowly around the cooling bronzes while humming kept spirits content and metal stable. You hum along quietly, feeling the cadence of centuries fold gently around you, a lullaby of metal, clay, and human patience. As the light fades further, the courtyard softens into twilight, and you feel yourself drawn into the slow, soothing rhythm of the space. Mainstream fact: the Eigen and Ronwin Guild's careful methods ensured that every figure produced could last centuries, preserving culture, history, and artistry. Historians still argue whether minor stylistic variations were intentional personal touches or natural consequences of the process. But here, observing and absorbing the cadence of their work, the distinction fades, leaving only serenity, rhythm, and gentle admiration. You step quietly toward the polishing area, where cool bronzes are now being refined. The figures rest on wooden benches, their surfaces gleaming faintly under the soft light, awaiting the patient touch of masters and apprentices alike. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members claim that rubbing the metal in circular motions while whispering a soft song brought out the figure's inner spirit, though it might just have been a meditative habit. You smile at the poetic notion and allow yourself to follow the gentle rhythm of polishing with your eyes. Before diving further, remember the ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting through these serene historical moments. And drop your location and local time. Imagining someone else polishing bronzes across the world adds a comforting sense of shared presence. You notice the precise movements of the masters as they gently file and buff each piece. Mainstream fact: post-casting polishing was critical to bring out the intricate details, remove small imperfections, and ensure that surfaces reflected light evenly. Historians still argue whether polishing techniques were standardized or varied by individual guild member, but the results are undeniably mesmerizing. Nearby, an apprentice carefully inspects a leopard plaque, brushing off tiny fragments of residual clay. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that polishing the bronze while telling a brief story about its subject imbued it with character and memory, a charming blend of narrative and craft. You watch, amused, as the boy whispers earnestly to the tiny leopard, his voice soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby from metal. A master guides another apprentice, showing subtle hand movements to remove stubborn rough spots without damaging delicate details. Mainstream fact. The finishing process could take days for larger plaques and statues, emphasizing patience as much as skill. Historians still argue whether finishing was more about aesthetic perfection or symbolic integrity, though in this courtyard, the two seem inseparable. The courtyard is bathed in soft late afternoon light. You notice how shadows stretch along benches and walls, highlighting the polished surfaces and gentle curves of each figure. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices sometimes added minuscule hidden marks or initials to record their presence, playful signatures invisible to casual observers. You lean in, imagining centuries later someone discovering these tiny secrets, connecting with an individual who lived and breathed through wax and bronze. Nearby, a small child balances carefully on a bench edge, watching an apprentice polish a figure. Mainstream fact. Children were often involved in gentle tasks from a young age to learn observation and patience without risking the integrity of bronze pieces. Historians still argue whether early exposure to work created prodigious skill or simply long-lasting respect for the craft, but the rhythm of learning here is undeniably immersive. You notice the faint metallic scent mixed with the earthy aroma of clay and charcoal. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling this particular scent while polishing helped them synchronize movements, though the effect is more likely psychological. You breathe slowly, letting the combination of smells, light, and gentle activity lull your attention further, your pulse slowing as you sink deeper into the scene. A master steps back to admire a recently polished plaque depicting an ancestral ceremony. Mainstream fact. The gleaming bronze surfaces were intended to catch sunlight in palace halls, enhancing the visual storytelling of historical events. Historians still argue whether certain design choices were driven by aesthetic preference, symbolic meaning, or practical visibility. But here, in the soft light of the courtyard, they feel simultaneously beautiful and timeless. You notice small, quiet exchanges between apprentices, gestures of encouragement, subtle corrections, shared laughter at minor mishaps. Fringe tidbit. Playful mistakes were often immortalized in stories, helping young casters internalize lessons about patience and precision. You lean back, absorbing this gentle blend of discipline, mentorship, and humor as a kind of lullaby in motion. As the sun sinks further, the bronze surfaces gleam warmly, catching every soft shadow and hint of movement. Mainstream fact. Careful finishing ensured that each piece would last generations, preserving artistry, culture, and ritual memory. Historians still argue whether slight stylistic differences were intentional signatures or natural results of material and technique. But standing here, immersed in the courtyard's rhythm, those debates feel distant, leaving only calm, focus, and admiration. You drift toward the section where apprentices are preparing to assemble multi-part bronze figures. The pieces lie neatly arranged on benches, cool to the touch, their surfaces gleaming in the gentle light. Fringe tidbit. Some casters believe that handling the components in a specific order encourage harmony in the final sculpture, though whether this is superstition or tradition remains unclear. You watch quietly, letting your gaze follow the slow, deliberate process, feeling oddly entranced by the measured motions. Before getting fully absorbed, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this quiet journey through history. And leave your location and local time, picturing fellow listeners observing the same patient rhythm across the globe. You notice how carefully apprentices select pieces to fit together, aligning edges and checking contours. Mainstream fact. Complex figures often required multiple casting stages, with separate components fused seamlessly to create a cohesive sculpture. Historians still argue whether certain methods of joining were influenced by earlier Ife traditions or were entirely innovated within Benin, but the skill and patience involved are undeniable. Nearby, a young apprentice gently sands a joint to ensure a perfect fit. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whispered that the right touch could be sensed intuitively, a mixture of muscle memory, observation, and perhaps a dash of mystical guidance. You smile, imagining the apprentice feeling the metal communicate with his fingers, an almost magical moment in this otherwise technical world. A master oversees the assembly, offering minimal verbal guidance. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through demonstration and observation, refining their ability to perceive small differences in shape, texture, and alignment. Historians still argue whether this method limited experimentation or enhanced the continuity of technique, but watch it unfold now. You feel the calm rhythm and meditative patience in every motion. The air carries the mingled aromas of metal, clay, and faint smoke from nearby furnaces. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling deeply while fitting components helped them focus and anticipate the next step, blending physiology with ritual. You take a slow breath, letting the sensory mix settle like a soft background score for the meticulous work. You notice the occasional playful moment. A child nudges a small piece slightly out of alignment, earning a soft chuckle from a nearby master rather than scolding. Mainstream fact. Minor mishaps were incorporated into lessons, teaching apprentices problem-solving and resilience. Historians still argue whether this informal pedagogy was a deliberate method or simply natural consequence of working with children, but the gentle humor imbues the courtyard with warmth. Across the benches, a pair of apprentices align components of a ceremonial leopard plaque. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members believe that the animal's gaze seemed off. It signaled imbalance, requiring small adjustments to restore harmony. You chuckle quietly, enjoying the playful mixture of ritual, superstition, and craftsmanship. The sunlight begins to soften further, highlighting subtle textures and contours of assembled pieces. Mainstream fact. The completed figures were designed to capture both aesthetic beauty and symbolic significance, often depicting royalty, ancestral figures, or ritual scenes. Historians still argue whether minute stylistic variations represented individual artistry or a collective guild standard. But here, you are content simply observing the quiet, precise rhythm of assembly. You notice a master gently tapping a component to ensure it sits perfectly within the mold or base. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices whisper that tapping in rhythm with a soft hum encouraged the bronze to settle, a charming blend of superstition and mindfulness. You hum along softly, allowing the cadence to drift over your consciousness, lulling you into a gentle, patient state. Finally, the assembled figures rest on benches, aligned in careful rows, awaiting the next stage of finishing. Mainstream fact. This stage required extraordinary patience, as slight misalignment could compromise the final aesthetic or structural integrity. Historians still argue whether the precise positioning of figures also carried hidden symbolic meaning, but in this softly lit courtyard, the debate feels almost academic. You are lulled instead by rhythm, care, and human dedication. You move toward the section where apprentices are gently inspecting the surfaces of the assembled bronze figures, their tools resting lightly against the metal. The late afternoon light falls softly across the courtyard, catching subtle glimmers on each polished curve. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices whispered that gently tapping the bronze at certain points listened for hidden flaws, as if the metal could respond to careful inquiry. You smile at the idea, imagining the bronzes murmuring their secrets as hands hover lightly over them. Before you sink further into observation, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the serene historical journey. And leave your location and local time. It's comforting to picture other listeners experiencing the same courtyard cadence. You notice the deliberate, almost meditative movements of the apprentices as they inspect each piece. Mainstream fact. Careful scrutiny ensured that all surfaces were free from casting irregularities or minor imperfections that could compromise the integrity of the final work. Historians still argue whether the strict attention to detail also carried symbolic or spiritual meaning, but you are captivated by the hypnotic calm of each gesture. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully brushes away residual clay fragments along the creases of a ceremonial leopard. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that whispering a soft story to the figure while brushing helps soothe the bronze, ensuring it retained character and spirit. You hum along quietly, feeling a gentle rhythm settle across your shoulders and into your chest. A master glides slowly along the row of figures, observing and offering subtle corrections. Mainstream fact: the Eigener Guild placed great emphasis on mentorship, teaching through demonstration, observation, and hands-on adjustment rather than verbal instruction. Historians still argue whether this method limited innovation or strengthened continuity of technique, but the result is undeniably mesmerizing. The faint metallic scent blends with warm clay and smoke from nearby furnaces. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices believe that inhaling this particular combination enhances focus and patience, though its effect is probably psychological. You take a slow, deliberate breath, allowing the scent to anchor you in the courtyard's meditative rhythm. Children weave carefully among benches, occasionally assisting with minor tasks or observing the process. Mainstream fact: early exposure to careful craft work instilled both skill and discipline, preparing them for formal apprenticeship in the future. Historians still argue whether this early involvement was intentionally pedagogical or a practical byproduct of communal life, but a harmony of the courtyard suggests a thoughtful balance. You notice soft, playful moments interspersed among serious inspection. A tiny fingerprint on a newly polished plaque, an apprentice quietly laughing at a minor slip, a child mimicking the gestures of an older peer. Fringe tidbit: these playful interactions were sometimes immortalized in oral anecdotes, subtly teaching patience, observation, and gentle humor. You lean back, absorbing the interplay of diligence and lightheartedness as a soothing rhythm. The sun dips lower, casting elongated shadows across benches and figures. Mainstream fact: the polished and inspected bronzes would later be installed in royal halls, serving both decorative and ceremonial purposes. Historians still argue whether minor stylistic variations indicated individual artistry or guild consensus. But here, you find peace in the slow, steady rhythm of preparation. A master taps lightly on a leopard plaque, ensuring a slight resonance signals structural integrity. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices whisper that humming along with the tapping helped the figure accept its new form. You hum quietly too, feeling the subtle cadence wrap around your awareness, a gentle lull in motion, sound, and light. Finally, you allow yourself to drift your gaze over the assembled figures, their surfaces warm and polished, reflecting soft shadows in the waning sunlight. Mainstream fact: this stage of inspection and refinement ensured the longevity and ceremonial readiness of each piece. Historians still argue whether the entire process was as much spiritual as technical, but you find yourself unbothered by the debate, carried instead by a slow, patient calm that threads through the courtyard, the apprentices, and the gleaming bronzes alike. You drift toward the area where apprentices are preparing pigments and patinas for the bronze figures. The benches are covered with small bowls containing subtle earth tones, reds, and deep greens, each intended to accentuate details in the metal. Fringe tidbit: some casters whisper that singing softly while mixing the pigments infuse bronze with character, though modern observers might call it a soothing ritual. You hum quietly along, feeling the courtyard's rhythm extend into gentle colors before you. Before sinking fully into observation, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this calm journey through history. And share your location and local time, picturing fellow listeners quietly observing alongside you. You notice the deliberate care with which apprentices select and mix the powders. Mainstream fact: patination was a delicate process, relying on precise ratios of natural minerals to create colors that enhance depth and symbolic meaning. Historians still argue whether some pigments were chosen for symbolic reasons or primarily aesthetic ones, but watching the careful blending is almost hypnotic. Nearby, a young apprentice gently dips a small brush into a muted green mixture, testing its consistency. Fringe tidbit: some guild members believe that whispering the subject's name while applying pigment ensured the bronze retained its spirit and authenticity. You smile, imagining tiny ancestral figures approving or frowning at their painted details. A master glides along, observing brushstrokes and offering subtle adjustments. Mainstream fact: Precise application prevented staining, streaking, or unintentional alterations in texture, which could detract from ceremonial importance. Historians still argue whether certain patination patterns were standardized across the guild or allowed for personal interpretation, but here, in the soft light of the courtyard, the debate fades beneath the meditative rhythm. The aroma of mineral dust mixes with lingering scent of clay and smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that inhaling the mixture heightened their sensitivity to subtle color changes, though the effect may have been psychological. You take a deep, slow breath, letting the aroma become part of the courtyard's soothing symphony. Children tiptoe between benches, observing careful brushwork or assisting by holding small bowls. Mainstream fact. Early involvement in pigment mixing introduced them to concepts of color balance, patience, and attention to detail. Historians still argue whether children's participation was intentionally pedagogical or simply a practical necessity, but the quiet attentiveness in their movements suggests thoughtful integration. You notice soft, playful moments. A tiny speck of pigment accidentally on a child's hand. A gentle laugh at a brush slipping slightly. Fringe tidbit. These minor mistakes were often incorporated into stories or lessons, emphasizing patience, humility, and the gentle humor embedded in the craft. You lean back slightly, letting the balance of seriousness and playfulness lull you into a gentle rhythm. The sun dips lower, bathing the courtyard in a golden glow, highlighting the subtle metallic sheen of each bronze figure against newly applied pigments. Mainstream fact. Patinas were often designed to interact with light in palace halls, enhancing visual storytelling. Historians still argue whether color choices were primarily symbolic or aesthetic, but the visual harmony before you feels both deliberate and calming. Across the benches, a master softly taps a brush against a figure, ensuring even coverage. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices whispered that rhythmic tapping synchronized the pigments with the figure's energy, a charming blend of superstition and method. You hum quietly alongside, feeling the subtle cadence settle into your awareness, a slow lull in both observation and thought. Finally, you allow your eyes to drift over the courtyard, taking in figures with applied patinas, glowing subtly in fading sunlight. Mainstream fact. This stage enhanced both ceremonial significance and aesthetic presence, completing months of meticulous work. Historians still argue whether all patination rituals were spiritually motivated, but here, watching and breathing the gentle rhythm of colors, metal, and hands, debate fades. What remains is calm patience and soft admiration for centuries of enduring craftsmanship. You move toward the area where apprentices are preparing the final mounting of bronze plaques and figures. Wooden frames and low stands are arranged neatly, ready to display the gleaming bronzes once the finishing touches are complete. Fringe tidbit. Some casters believe that placing the bronze on the correct type would enhance its spirit, though this may simply have been a meditative habit passed down through generations. You watch the careful positioning, feeling the gentle rhythm of human attention and care settle around you. Before observing further, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the slow, immersive journey through history, and share your location and local time, picturing others quietly following along with you. You notice the apprentices measuring and adjusting each plaque meticulously. Mainstream fact. Proper mounting ensures stability, optimal display angle, and aesthetic balance, preserving the intricate details created over weeks of labor. Historians still argue whether certain placements were standardized according to guild tradition or adapted to individual palace preferences, but the careful attention is hypnotically calming. Nearby, a young apprentice adjusts a bronze leopard onto a low stand, ensuring that its posture is perfect. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whispered that aligning the animal's gaze with the rising sun symbolically blessed the piece, an imaginative mix of ritual and art. You smile, imagining centuries of sunlight casting the same gentle illumination across the polished bronze. A master glides between benches, guiding hands with subtle gestures rather than words. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation and correction rather than formal instruction, reinforcing both skill and patience. Historians still argue whether this method limited creativity or strengthened continuity of technique, but watching it now, you feel the courtyard's meditative rhythm and steady calm. The air carries a blend of warm bronze, polished wood, and faint smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that inhaling deeply while mounting pieces improved their precision, blending mindfulness with practical skill. You take a long, slow breath, letting the scents anchor you in the gentle pulse of the courtyard. Children weave carefully around the benches, assisting in minor ways or observing silently. Mainstream fact. Their involvement in simple, safe tasks taught them observation, patience, and the rhythm of craft without endangering the integrity of the bronzes. Historians still argue whether this early engagement was intentionally educational or a byproduct of communal life, but the effect is calming and harmonious. You notice soft, playful moments interspersed with focused work. A child balances a stand carefully. A small laugh erupts from a misaligned tool. A gentle nudge corrects a figure's position. Fringe tidbit. These minor interactions were often recorded in oral stories, emphasizing lessons about patience, focus, and gentle humor. You let yourself absorb the quiet mix of diligence and play, a soothing cadence. As sunlight fades further, the courtyard glows in muted amber, highlighting the polished surfaces and carefully aligned figures. Mainstream fact. Correct mounting and display was critical for ceremonial use and aesthetic presentation within palace halls. Historians still argue whether minor variations signaled individual artistry or adhered strictly to guild conventions, but here, in the gentle light and steady rhythm, the distinction feels irrelevant. A master taps lightly on a mounted figure, checking stability. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices sometimes hum softly during these checks, a gentle ritual thought to ensure the bronze's contentment. You hum along quietly, letting the soft cadence fill the space, relaxing both body and mind. Finally, you let your gaze drift over the assembled courtyard. Bronze is polished, patina is applied, mounted with care, reflecting the fading sunlight in warm, golden glimmers. Mainstream fact. This careful completion preserved not only artistry, but cultural heritage. Historians still argue whether spiritual and technical motivations were intertwined intentionally, but the slow, rhythmic cadence of preparation, inspection, and mounting leave you entirely absorbed in calm patience, soft admiration, and gentle satisfaction. You step toward the area where apprentices and masters are now preparing the courtyard for the final inspection by senior guild members. The benches are rearranged, excess tools cleared, and every bronze figure positioned to reflect both craftsmanship and ceremonial importance. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whispered that walking slowly around the courtyard in a clockwise pattern before inspection brought good fortune, though historians might call it tradition rather than magic. You follow the quiet rhythm, feeling the measured energy settle softly around you. Before you fully immerse, remember the ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting through these historical moments. And leave your location and local time, picturing others quietly witnessing the same courtyard ballet across the globe. You notice apprentices smoothing dust from bronze surfaces with soft brushes, their movements careful and unhurried. Mainstream fact. The final inspection ensured each piece met the guild's exacting standards for display, ceremonial accuracy, and durability. Historians still argue whether certain gestures during the stage carried symbolic meaning or were purely practical, but watching the process now feels like a meditative practice. Nearby, a young apprentice gently adjusts a minor detail on a leopard plaque. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members believe that whispering a soft story about the animal's hunt while making these final touches ensured the bronze captured its spirit fully. You smile quietly, imagining ancient leopards frozen in gleaming bronze, each with its own tale. A master glides along, offering subtle guidance without words, correcting alignment or smoothing edges. Mainstream fact. Much of guild training relied on observation and imitation rather than verbal instruction, fostering both patience and deep skill. Historians still argue whether this limited individual creativity or strengthened continuity, but the hypnotic rhythm of this silent mentorship is calming. The air carries a mixture of metallic tang, faint clay, and lingering smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that inhaling the courtyard scents enhanced focus and sensitivity, though the effect may be psychological. You take a deep breath, letting the aromas settle in your chest, blending with the warm light and gentle motion around you. Children weave carefully among the figures, some assisting with holding small tools, others simply observing. Mainstream fact. Early participation trained young observers in precision, rhythm, and patience without risking damage to delicate bronze work. Historians still argue whether this involvement was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but it fosters a gentle, immersive learning environment. You notice soft, playful interruptions, a minor slip corrected with chuckle, a finger accidentally smudging a patina, a whispered joke about the last poor leopard. Fringe tidbit. These moments were often recounted later as oral lessons in patience, focus, and humor. You lean back slightly, letting the combination of discipline and gentle levity wrap around your awareness. The sun dips further, casting warm, amber hues across the courtyard, emphasizing polished bronzes and shadow textures. Mainstream fact. The Eigeneronwin Guild's meticulous attention to detail ensured figures endured centuries, both as cultural artifacts and ceremonial objects. Historians still argue whether minor stylistic variations reflected individual artistry or strictly followed guild standards, but the meditative rhythm of preparation and inspection absorbs your attention completely. A master taps lightly on a mounted plaque, ensuring its stability. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices sometimes hum quietly while checking stability, a ritual thought to encourage the bronze's contentment. You hum along, letting the cadence sink slowly into your awareness, a gentle lull weaving to the courtyard's soft activity. Finally, you allow your eyes to drift across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patina is set, mounted carefully and prepared for inspection. Mainstream fact. This meticulous process combined patience, technical skill, and ceremonial significance. Historians still debate the balance of spiritual versus practical motivation, but in the fading light and rhythmic cadence of movement, only calm, gentle admiration and quiet focus remain. You wander toward the edge of the courtyard where apprentices are organizing final ceremonial arrangements. The bronzes, now polished, patinated, and mounted, are laid out in deliberate rows, ready for the senior guild members' scrutiny. Fringe tidbit. Some casters claim that placing certain figures near the sunlit corner energized them for ceremonies, though historians debate whether this was practical placement or symbolic ritual. You let your eyes glide over the orderly arrangement, absorbing the careful choreography of the courtyard. Before delving deeper, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this slow, immersive journey. And share your location and local time, imagining others quietly experiencing the same serene rhythm. You notice apprentices walking lightly between rows, adjusting angles and spacing with delicate precision. Mainstream fact. Precise positioning enhanced both aesthetic impact and ceremonial function, ensuring that figures reflected historical and cultural accuracy. Historians still argue whether the exact spacing was codified in guild manuals or evolved to practice, but observing the patience in each movement is hypnotically calming. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully tilts a ceremonial leopard to ensure the gaze aligns with other pieces. Fringe tidbit. Whispers among guild members suggested that if the leopard looked at the rising sun correctly, ancestral spirits were pleased. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of repeated sunrise approvals. A master glides silently along the rows, offering minor adjustments and approving subtle touches. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn through observation and practice rather than verbal instruction, reinforcing meticulous skill and attention to detail. Historians still argue whether the system limited innovation or strengthened continuity. But here, the gentle rhythm is deeply soothing. The courtyard air is a blend of warm metal, faint clay, and lingering smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that inhaling this mixture sharpened awareness of minor flaws. Those psychological factors were likely at play. You take a long, slow breath, letting the scents mingle with the golden sunlight, deepening your sense of presence. Children carefully navigate between benches, assisting with minor tasks or simply observing the meticulous adjustments. Mainstream fact. Early exposure to craft taught observation, patience, and rhythm without risking the integrity of the bronze work. Historians still debate whether this was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but the harmony and focus in their movements is calming. Soft, playful moments punctuate the seriousness. A small brush tip falls and is caught midair. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A minor smudge is corrected with a grin. Fringe tidbit. These small incidents were recorded later as oral lessons in patience, humor, and focus. You let the rhythm of work and gentle levity settle over you like a soft, warm blanket. Sunlight shifts, highlighting polished bronzes in subtle glimmers and elongated shadows. Mainstream fact. The Eigenaramwin Guild's care ensure that ceremonial pieces endure for centuries as cultural artifacts. Historians still debate whether minor stylistic nuances were intentional signatures or guild conventions, but watching the careful layout is soothing and hypnotic. A master gently taps a figure, testing its stability on the mount. Fringe tidbit. Humming while checking was a common ritual to encourage contentment in the bronze, blending superstition with methodical care. You hum quietly alongside, letting the slow cadence of ritual and observation ease your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts over the courtyard. Bronze is aligned, polished, patina is set, and arranged for ceremonial inspection. Mainstream fact. This stage represents the culmination of patience, skill, and tradition. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but here, immersed in rhythm, light, and careful human touch, you feel calm, attentive, and gently lulled into serenity. You step quietly toward the area where apprentices are preparing ceremonial presentation elements. Small cloths, cushions, and display boards that will accompany the bronzes. The arrangements are deliberate, each item chosen to complement the gleaming metal and enhance visual storytelling. Fringe tidbit. Some casters believe that lining up the cushions in particular sequence invited harmony to the display, though historians debate whether this was ritual or habit. You let your eyes follow the careful motions, feeling the slow, meditative rhythm of preparation wash over you. Before diving fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this tranquil historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining others quietly witnessing the same meticulous arrangements across the world. You notice apprentices placing each item with gentle precision, measuring distances and checking alignment. Mainstream fact. Proper arrangement ensured aesthetic balance, ceremonial accuracy, and visual coherence, enhancing the observer's experience in the palace. Historians still argue whether such arrangements were standardized across all guild projects or adapted to individual palace preferences, but the calm, rhythmic motion is captivating. Nearby, a young apprentice adjusts a small silk cushion beneath a leopard plaque, ensuring it sits perfectly flat. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whispered that cushioning certain figures in soft fabrics protected their spirit during the ceremony, a poetic touch rather than a practical one. You smile, imagining the ancient bronzes resting on their silk thrones with quiet dignity. A master glides along the arrangement, offering subtle guidance with light, gestures rather than words. Mainstream fact. Guild instruction emphasize observation and careful adjustment, cultivating patience and refined skill. Historians still debate whether the system restricted creativity or reinforced mastery. But here, the silent choreography of work is hypnotically soothing. The scent of polished bronze mingles with faint aromas of cloth and residual clay. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling these combined scents sharpened focus, though psychological factors likely played a role. You take a slow breath, letting the gentle medley of smells ground you in the courtyard's rhythm. Children tiptoe between benches, assisting lightly or observing quietly. Careful not to disturb the display. Mainstream fact. Involving children taught spatial awareness, attention to detail, and patience without compromising the integrity of the artifacts. Historians still argue whether this was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but their cautious movements add a soft, reassuring hum to the scene. You notice playful moments woven into the solemn task. A cushion shifts slightly, prompting soft laughter. A small hand brushes away a stray speck of dust. An apprentice whispers encouragement to a peer. Fringe tidbit. These minor interactions were later recounted in oral anecdotes, teaching lessons about humor, focus, and patience. You lean back, letting the gentle mixture of discipline and levity envelop your awareness. The sunlight softens further, reflecting warmly off bronzes and casting subtle shadows across silk and wood. Mainstream fact. Careful ceremonial arrangement preserved both aesthetic and symbolic integrity, allowing each figure to convey meaning fully. Historians still debate whether some placement choices were spiritual or purely practical, but watching the calm precision now is soothing and hypnotic. A master gently taps a cushion under a bronze figure to ensure stability. Fringe tidbit. Humming quietly during adjustments was a common practice, thought to encourage contentment in the bronze, a delicate rhythm blending superstition and methodical care. You hum softly along, feeling your awareness merge with the slow cadence of ritual and human touch. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze figures polished, patina set, mounted carefully and cushioned with precision, ready for ceremonial display. Mainstream fact. This stage reflects a culmination of skill, patience, and tradition. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in this softly lit, rhythmic environment, you feel calm, attentive, and gently transported into the measured world of Benin's bronze casters. You wander toward the courtyard central area where apprentices are arranging the final ceremonial order of the bronzes for inspection. The figures sit in careful rows, each positioned to catch sunlight at precise angles. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that arranging the figures in a circular formation encouraged a conversation between the ancestral spirits, though historians debate whether this was symbolic or simply tradition. You let your eyes drift over the measured lines and arcs, feeling the calming rhythm of deliberate, patient movement. Before continuing, remember the ritual, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this gentle journey through history. And share your location and local time, imagining others quietly observing the same courtyard choreography. You notice apprentices walking lightly among the figures, adjusting angles, checking that each gaze aligns harmoniously. Mainstream fact. Careful positioning ensured ceremonial accuracy, visual balance, and structural stability, reinforcing both aesthetic and symbolic purpose. Historians still argue whether exact placement adhered strictly to guild standards or allowed for subtle individual expression, but the slow rhythm of adjustment is hypnotically calming. Nearby, a young apprentice tilts a leopard plaque slightly to align it with the surrounding figures. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whisper that positioning animals according to cardinal directions pleased ancestral spirits, blending ritual with meticulous craft. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of careful observation guiding every subtle angle. A master glides between benches, silently approving adjustments or offering minor corrections. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation, imitation, and hands-on refinement, a teaching method emphasizing patience and focus. Historians still argue whether the system limited innovation or reinforced guild continuity, but the calm cadence is deeply soothing. The air is filled with a gentle sense of warm bronze, polished wood, and faint clay. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that inhaling this aroma sharpened their attention to small details, though it may have been a psychological effect. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the scent and soft light anchor you in the courtyard's rhythm. Children move carefully between benches, assisting in subtle ways or observing silently. Mainstream fact. Early exposure taught observation, patience, and spatial awareness without risking delicate bronze work. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their measured presence enhances the courtyard's calm energy. Soft, playful moments punctuate the focus. A small brush slips, laughter follows. An apprentice whispers a joke to appear. A hand nudges a figure into perfect alignment. Fringe tidbit. These minor interactions were later recounted in oral anecdotes as lessons in patience, attention, and gentle humor. You let the interplay of diligence and lightheartedness settle around you. The sun continues its descent, bathing the courtyard in warm amber tones, highlighting polished bronzes and casting elongated shadows across the arranged figures. Mainstream fact. Precise ceremonial arrangement ensured that each figure conveyed its intended historical and spiritual narrative. Historians still debate whether minor variations in placement were symbolic or aesthetic, but observing the careful organization is soothing and almost hypnotic. A master taps lightly on a figure, checking stability. Fringe tidbit. Apprentices hum quietly during these checks, a ritual intended to encourage contentment in the bronze. You hum softly along, feeling the slow cadence of ritual, observation, and gentle human touch settle over your awareness. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Figures polished, patina is set, mounted, cushioned, and arranged with precise care. Mainstream fact. This stage exemplifies the culmination of craftsmanship, patience, and tradition. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in this quiet, rhythmic environment, you feel calm, attentive, and gently immersed in the enduring legacy of Benin's bronze casters. You move toward the edges of the courtyard, where apprentices are arranging ceremonial banners and small decorative elements around the bronzes. Each cloth and ornament is carefully positioned to complement the gleaming figures, creating a subtle interplay of color, texture, and light. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that the banner's gentle sway chatted with the bronzes, keeping the spirits lively, though historians debate whether this was ritual or habit. You let your gaze drift over the softly moving textiles, feeling the meditative rhythm of preparation envelope you. Before fully immersing, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the serene journey through history. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow viewers quietly participating in the same calm observation across the globe. You notice apprentices walking carefully between figures and banners, adjusting folds and angles with gentle precision. Mainstream fact. Proper placement enhances ceremonial presentation, aesthetic harmony, and symbolic balance. Historians still argue whether the exact alignment of decorative elements was standardized across guild projects or adapted to individual preferences, but the deliberate, measured movements are soothing to watch. Nearby, a young apprentice straightens a small silk banner next to a leopard plaque. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whisper that aligning banners with the prevailing breeze encouraged dialogue among figures, a poetic notion blending ritual and observation. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of subtle wind guiding ceremonial arrangements. A master glides slowly among the benches, offering minimal gestures of approval, adjusting angles only when necessary. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn through observation and subtle correction, developing patience and keen attention to detail. Historians still argue whether this method restricted personal creativity or strengthened continuity of craft, but the silent, rhythmic guidance is deeply relaxing. The air carries faint metallic tang, mingling with cloth and residual smoke from the courtyard's furnaces. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that inhaling this aroma helped them sense small misalignments or subtle shifts in composition, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a long, slow breath, letting the scent and gentle movement of the banners anchor your awareness. Children move quietly among benches, adjusting minor elements under guidance or simply observing. Mainstream fact. Early involvement trained them in spatial reasoning, focus, and patience without endangering delicate bronze work. Historians still debate whether this was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but their careful attention adds to the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate meticulous work. A banner flutters unexpectedly, prompting a gentle laugh. A child nudges a figure into alignment. A whisper of encouragement passes between apprentices. Fringe tidbit. These small interactions were often recorded in oral stories, teaching lessons about patience, humor, and observation. You allow the subtle interplay of discipline and levity to envelop your mind. The fading sunlight casts long shadows, glinting off bronzes and emphasizing textures of silk and metal. Mainstream fact. Proper ceremonial arrangements enhance storytelling and symbolism, ensuring each figure conveyed its intended narrative. Historians still debate whether minor variations in decoration were symbolic, aesthetic, or personal choices, but watching the careful placement is hypnotically calming. A master taps lightly on a bronze figure in adjacent banner, ensuring stability. Fringe tidbit. Humming softly during these checks was common, thought to encourage contentment in the bronzes. You hum quietly along, feeling the slow, steady cadence of ritual observation and human care settle gently around you. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze figures polished, patinas applied, mounted, cushioned, and now surrounded by banners and decorative elements arranged with meticulous attention. Mainstream fact. This stage reflects culmination of skill, patience, and ceremonial consideration. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but in this soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's quiet corner, where apprentices are preparing ceremonial tools and accessories that will accompany the bronzes during formal presentation. Small chisels, brushes, and polishing cloths are arranged with precision, their surfaces reflecting the soft afternoon light. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that placing tools in particular order respected the spirit of craft, though historians debate whether this was symbolic or practical. You watch the gentle hands arranging each item, feeling the meditative rhythm settle around you. Before getting fully absorbed, remember the ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this slow, immersive historical journey. And share your location and local time, picturing others quietly observing the same measure activity across the globe. You notice apprentices aligning each tool carefully, checking for symmetry and accessibility. Mainstream fact. Properly arranged tools allowed for efficient ceremonial use and reflected the discipline and organization of the guild. Historians still argue whether specific placements followed codified standards or evolved through practice, but observing the deliberate care is calming and hypnotic. Nearby, a young apprentice gently polishes a small brush, ensuring bristles are straight and clean. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members believe whispering softly to tools imbued them with patience and focus, blending superstition and mindfulness. You smile quietly, imagining the quiet conversation between apprentice and tool. A master glides along, offering subtle adjustments without interrupting the gentle rhythm. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation and hands-on guidance, cultivating patience, precision, and attention to detail. Historians still debate whether this method limited innovation or ensured consistent mastery, but the quiet cadence of teaching is soothing. The air carries faint metallic scent mixed with traces of cloth, polish, and residual smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices swore that inhaling the combination sharpened their ability to detect small imperfections, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the aromas deepen your sense of immersion. Children move quietly between benches, assisting or observing. Mainstream fact. Early involvement taught fine motor skills, observation, and patience without risking damage to delicate bronze pieces. Historians still argue whether this was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but the calm attentiveness adds to the courtyard's meditative ambience. Soft, playful moments punctuate the solemn task. A tiny tool slips slightly, prompting a gentle laugh. A whispered joke travels between apprentices. A brush bristles flick off a speck of dust. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were later recounted as lessons emphasizing patience, humor, and focus. You allow the gentle interplay of diligence and levity to soothe your awareness. The sunlight softens, casting amber reflections across polished tools and bronze surfaces. Mainstream fact. Careful preparation of ceremonial tools ensured smooth operation during formal events. Historians still debate whether minor ritual gestures carried symbolic meaning, but the slow, rhythmic attention to detail is mesmerizing. A master taps lightly on a brush or tool, ensuring alignment. Fringe tidbit. Humming softly during checks was common, believed to encourage contentment in both tools and apprentices. You hum quietly along, letting the calm cadence of ritual, observation, and human touch wrap around your consciousness. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze figures, polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, decorated, and now accompanied by meticulously arranged tools. Mainstream fact. This stage reflects culmination of skill, patience, and ceremonial consideration. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but here, in soft light and rhythmic activity, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into the enduring craft tradition of Benin's bronze casters. You drift toward the area where apprentices and masters are rehearsing ceremonial movements around the arranged bronzes. The courtyard, now fully prepared, hums softly with anticipation as subtle steps echo on the packed earth. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that moving in measured, almost dance-like patterns please the spirits, though historians debate whether this was symbolic choreography or practical rehearsal. You follow the gentle rhythm of steps and gestures, feeling your own breathing slow in tandem. Before immersing fully, remember the ritual. like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the slow, immersive exploration of history. And share your location and local time, imagining other listeners quietly participating in the same tranquil observation. You notice apprentices walking carefully between figures, maintaining precise spacing and timing. Mainstream fact. Ceremonial rehearsals ensure that figures were approached, displayed, and handled correctly during formal presentations. Historians still argue whether minor gestures carried symbolic meaning or were purely practical, but observing the measured practice is calming and hypnotic. Nearby, a young apprentice gently lifts a leopard plaque, practicing its placement without disturbing surrounding figures. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whispered that whispering the animal's name during movement encouraged loyalty in the figure, blending ritual with mindfulness. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of repeated practice and soft murmurs. A master glides along, silently correcting alignment or pace with light gestures. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation and hands-on rehearsal, cultivating precision, patience, and rhythmic awareness. Historians still debate whether this method limited individual creativity or reinforced guild continuity, but the quiet cadence of repeated movement is hypnotically soothing. The air is filled with soft sounds of shifting metal, cloth brushing, and faint echoes of footsteps. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling the mingled scents of bronze, cloth, and dust-sharpened timing and focus, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a long, slow breath, letting the gentle sounds and aromas anchor your presence. Children tiptoe among benches, mimicking the movements quietly or assisting in minor ways. Mainstream fact. Early exposure to ritual movement trained observation, coordination, and patience without risking damage to delicate bronze pieces. Historians still argue whether this was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but their careful attentiveness enhances the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the rehearsal, a small step slightly offbeat, a whispered chuckle, a gentle nudge aligning a figure perfectly. Fringe tidbit. These minor incidents were often recounted in oral anecdotes as lessons in humor, patience, and focus. You let the interplay of discipline and levity settle comfortably over your awareness. The late afternoon sun casts warm, amber light across bronzes, banners, and tools. Mainstream fact. Rehearsing ceremonial movements preserve both the aesthetic presentation and cultural narrative intended for palace display. Historians still debate whether variations in motion held symbolic weight, but observing the quiet practice is soothing and absorbing. A master gently taps a bronze figure to signal timing, while apprentices hum softly during synchronized movement. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize the spirits of the figures with the practitioner's energy. You hum along quietly, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of ritual, observation, and human care wash over you. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard, polished, patinated bronzes, cushioned and adorned, accompanied by arranged tools, and now surrounded by measured ceremonial movement. Mainstream fact. This stage represents the culmination of patience, skill, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate the spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the gentle light and rhythmic repetition, you feel calm, attentive, and softly transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's quiet corner where apprentices are practicing the delicate ritual of cleaning and polishing the bronzes after each rehearsal. The sun now casts soft golden light across each surface, highlighting textures and patinas in gentle detail. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that whispering softly to the bronzes while polishing soothed their spirit, though historians debate whether this was a superstitious habit or a meditative practice. You watch the slow, deliberate strokes, feeling the rhythm of patience settle around you. Before fully immersing, remember the ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the soothing exploration of historical craft. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow listeners quietly following along in their own peaceful spaces. You notice apprentices moving lightly, using soft cloths and careful hands to remove dust and fingerprints. Mainstream fact. Maintaining the polish ensured that ceremonial pieces reflected both skill and reverence, preserving aesthetic and symbolic value. Historians still argue whether these cleaning rituals were primarily technical or carried spiritual meaning, but the precise, quiet movements are calming and meditative. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully wipes along the curves of a leopard plaque. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members believe that softly humming while polishing improved the figure's harmony, blending mindfulness with craft. You hum quietly along, feeling your own breathing synchronize with a gentle rhythm. A master glides slowly between benches, lightly adjusting posture or hand position, guiding without interrupting the quiet focus. Mainstream fact. Apprenticeship emphasized observation and hands-on correction, cultivating patience, dexterity, and attention to detail. Historians still debate whether this limited creativity or strengthened continuity, but the silent guidance is hypnotically soothing. The air carries faint metallic warmth mingled with soft cloth fibers and lingering scents of smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believed inhaling these scents heightened sensitivity to subtle imperfections, though the effect was likely psychological. You take a long, slow breath, letting the smells, warmth, and light deepen your sense of presence. Children move quietly between benches, polishing or observing without disrupting the meticulous work. Mainstream fact. Early exposure trained coordination, focus, and patience while preserving delicate bronze surfaces. Historians still argue whether this was intentional teaching or a practical necessity, but their gentle involvement enhances the courtyard's meditative energy. Soft, playful moments punctuate the calm, a small smudge corrected with a chuckle, a whispered joke about an accidental fingerprint, a gentle nudge aligning a figure. Fringe tidbit. These minor interactions were often recounted in oral anecdotes, emphasizing humor, patience, and observational skill. You let the rhythm of care and lightheartedness envelop your awareness. The sun continues to soften, casting long shadows and warm highlights across polished bronzes and patinated surfaces. Mainstream fact. Careful post-rehearsal cleaning preserves ceremonial integrity and aesthetic harmony. Historians still debate whether the ritual gestures carried symbolic meaning, but the slow, deliberate cadence of polish and observation is calming. A master taps lightly on a figure or cloth, ensuring everything rests evenly. Fringe tidbit. Humming during these checks was common, thought to reassure both apprentice and bronze. You hum quietly along, letting the soft cadence of ritual, observation, and gentle touch ease you further into relaxation. Finally, your gaze drifts over the courtyard. Polished, patinated bronzes, cushioned and adorned, with carefully arranged tools and banners, now freshly cleaned and aligned. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies patience, craftsmanship, and ceremonial care. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but in the golden light and rhythmic attention, you feel calm, gently immersed, and quietly transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the central courtyard, where apprentices and masters are now rehearsing the ceremonial handling of the bronzes with greater precision. Each figure, polished and mounted, is lifted, examined, and returned to its designated spot, the movement slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that handling the bronzes while softly chanting ancestral names enhance their presence, though historians debate whether this was symbolic ritual or mindful practice. You watch the careful choreography, letting your breathing settle into the courtyard's gentle tempo. Before diving fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this tranquil exploration of history. And share your location and local time, imagining other listeners quietly following the same rhythmic preparation across the globe. You notice apprentices lifting each piece carefully, adjusting angles, and observing details closely. Mainstream fact. Ceremonial handling ensured that every figure could be moved safely while preserving aesthetic integrity and symbolic alignment. Historians still argue whether small gestures carried spiritual meaning or were purely practical, but observing the slow, careful movements is soothing. Nearby, a young apprentice gently lifts a leopard plaque, examining its gaze and posture. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whispered that if the figure's eyes seemed aligned with the sun, it indicated ancestral approval, a poetic blend of superstition and observation. You smile quietly, imagining generations of careful inspection guiding these subtle rituals. A master glides between benches, offering light adjustments and soft guidance without breaking the calm. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation, repeated practice, and hands-on refinement, cultivating patience and precise skill. Historians still debate whether this method can strain creativity or strengthen continuity, but the silent cadence is deeply relaxing. The air is filled with subtle sounds of shifting bronze, soft footsteps, and the faint murmur of apprentices humming while handling the figures. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim to hum align their rhythm with the energy of the bronzes. Those psychological effects were likely significant. You take a long, slow breath, letting the soft sounds blend with the warm sunlight and quiet courtyard energy. Children move cautiously, assisting with minor lifting tasks or simply observing. Mainstream fact. Early involvement trained focus, patience, and coordination without compromising the delicate bronze work. Historians still debate whether this was formal teaching or practical necessity, but their careful presence adds to the courtyard's gentle atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the solemnity. A small plaque wobbles slightly, prompting a soft laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A gentle nudge realigns a figure. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were often recounted in oral traditions, emphasizing humor, patience, and observation. You let the mixture of discipline and levity settle around you, calming and hypnotic. The late afternoon sun bathes bronzes in warm golden light, highlighting patinas, polished surfaces, and subtle textures. Mainstream fact. Careful ceremonial handling preserved the artistry, symbolism, and longevity of the pieces. Historians still debate whether minor variations in handling carried spiritual significance, but the slow, rhythmic choreography is mesmerizing. A master taps lightly on a figure to ensure stability and alignment, while apprentices hum softly during synchronized movement. Fringe tidbit. The hum was thought to harmonize both the apprentice and the bronze's energy. You hum along quietly, letting the gentle cadence of ritual, observation, and human care lull your awareness further. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Polished, patinated bronzes, cushioned, adorned, surrounded by banners and tools, now carefully handled and rehearsed with measured attention. Mainstream fact. This stage exemplifies patience, skill, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the calm light and rhythmic movement, you feel fully immersed, tranquil, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You wander the corner of the courtyard where apprentices are now rehearsing the ceremonial presentation order for visiting dignitaries. Each bronze, carefully mounted and polished, is placed in sequence, reflecting both artistic intent and historical hierarchy. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whispered that presenting figures in a specific rhythm invited favor from spirits, though historians debate whether this was symbolic ritual or practical protocol. You let your eyes follow the slow, deliberate flow of movement, feeling the courtyard's gentle energy wrap around you. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this soothing exploration of history. And share your location and local time, imagining others quietly participating in the same calm observation. You notice apprentices moving figures with precise care, checking alignment, angles, and spacing. Mainstream fact. Correct presentation order was critical for ceremonial accuracy, ensuring that observers could appreciate both historical significance and aesthetic detail. Historians still argue whether exact placement followed strict guild rules or was adapted to each palace's preferences, but watching the measured practice is calming. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully positions a leopard plaque according to hierarchy, ensuring it maintains prominence among other figures. Fringe tidbit. Whispers suggested that aligning powerful animal figures first set the tone for the display, blending ceremonial psychology with meticulous craft. You smile quietly, imagining the centuries of repeated care guiding each precise movement. A master glides slowly among benches, adjusting positions with subtle gestures. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn through observation, repetition, and hands-on guidance, cultivating patience and attention to subtle detail. Historians still debate whether the system restricted creativity or reinforced continuity, but the silent cadence is deeply soothing. The air carries a gentle mixture of warm bronze, polished cloth, and faint clay smoke. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling these scents enhance focus and precision, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the aromas anchor you in the courtyard's calm rhythm. Children move carefully, assisting or quietly observing the arrangements. Mainstream fact: early involvement trained spatial reasoning, patience, and coordination without risking damage to delicate bronzes. Historians still debate whether this exposure was intentional pedagogy or a practical necessity, but their cautious movements contribute to the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the practice. A small figure wobbles, eliciting a chuckle. A whispered joke travels between apprentices. A gentle nudge aligns a plaque perfectly. Fringe tidbit: these interactions were often recorded orally as lessons in humor, patience, and attentiveness. You let the gentle interplay of discipline and levity envelop your awareness. The afternoon sun softens, casting warm reflections across polished bronzes, banners, and accessories. Mainstream fact: ceremonial rehearsal ensured aesthetic harmony and historical narrative during formal presentation. Historians still debate whether subtle differences in order were symbolic, but the slow, rhythmic choreography is hypnotically calming. A master taps lightly on a figure, signaling alignment, while apprentices hum softly during synchronized movement. Fringe tidbit: humming was thought to harmonize apprentice energy with the spirit of the bronzes. You hum along quietly, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of ritual and observation ease your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronzes polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, and now rehearsed in precise ceremonial order. Mainstream fact: this stage represents culmination of craftsmanship, patience, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft light and rhythmic preparation, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into the enduring tradition of Benin's bronze casters. You wander toward the quieter side of the courtyard, where apprentices are now rehearsing the subtle gestures used to introduce the bronzes during formal ceremonies. Each movement is slow, deliberate, and measured, designed to convey respect, hierarchy, and cultural narrative. Fringe tidbit: some casters whisper that subtle hand motions whispered honor to ancestral spirits, though historians debate whether this was symbolic ritual or practical etiquette. You follow the gentle choreography, letting your breathing align with the measured pace of the apprentices. Before fully immersing, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this gentle historical exploration. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow listeners quietly observing the same calm practice across the globe. You notice apprentices extending hands with care, tilting plaques gently, and pausing just long enough for observers' eyes to rest on each figure. Mainstream fact: ceremonial gestures emphasize the importance of hierarchy and visual storytelling, ensuring each figure's role was clear during presentation. Historians still argue whether the exact gestures followed strict codified rules or evolved organically, but the slow, precise practice is soothing. Nearby, a young apprentice adjusts the angle of a leopard plaque, ensuring its gaze aligns harmoniously with other figures. Fringe tidbit: whispers suggested that the angle of gaze could invite the presence of ancestral favor, blending spiritual belief with careful technique. You smile quietly, imagining generations of soft, deliberate gestures guiding ceremonial practice. A master glides along, lightly correcting hand positions and posture without disrupting the rhythm. Mainstream fact: apprentices learn primarily through observation and repeated practice, developing patience, focus, and subtle physical awareness. Historians still debate whether this method limited creativity or strengthened guild continuity, but the slow cadence of guidance is hypnotically calming. The air is filled with faint metallic tang, mingled with soft cloth and residual smoke. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices claim that inhaling this mixture helped maintain rhythm and precision, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a long, slow breath, letting the sense and gentle movement of hands anchor your presence. Children move cautiously among benches, mimicking gestures or assisting with minor adjustments. Mainstream fact: early involvement trained coordination, patience, and spatial awareness without compromising delicate bronze surfaces. Historians still debate whether this exposure was intentional pedagogy or practical necessity, but their careful presence enhances the courtyard's calm atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the serious practice. A hand wavers slightly, eliciting a small laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A gentle nudge corrects a minor tilt. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were later recounted in oral anecdotes, teaching lessons about humor, focus, and patience. You allow the interplay of diligence and levity to settle gently over your awareness. The sunlight softens further, casting warm amber light across bronzes, silk banners, and tools. Mainstream fact. Precise ceremonial gestures ensured that visual storytelling and hierarchical significance were clearly communicated during formal events. Historians still debate whether subtle variations carried symbolic weight, but the slow, meditative practice is mesmerizing. A master taps lightly on a figure to signal alignment, while apprentices hum softly to maintain rhythm. Fringe tidbit. Humming was thought to harmonize the energy between practitioner and bronze, blending ritual with focus. You hum along quietly, letting the gentle cadence of observation, ritual, and human touch wrap around your awareness. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, and now accompanied by measured, graceful ceremonial gestures. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies a culmination of craftsmanship, patience, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the calm light and rhythmic precision, you feel immersed, relaxed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's edge where apprentices are rehearsing the slow, careful motions of presenting ceremonial offerings alongside the bronzes. Small trays of symbolic items, miniature figures, beads, and crafted tokens are placed with delicate attention to order and symmetry. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that the precise arrangement pleased the spirits, though historians debate whether this was symbolic ritual or practical guidance. You watch the rhythmic motions, feeling your own breathing settle into the gentle cadence of the courtyard. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this calming historical exploration. And share your location and local time, imagining other viewers quietly participating in the same meditative observation. You notice apprentices carrying trays slowly, adjusting placement, and pausing to ensure the items complement the bronze's arrangement. Mainstream fact. Ceremonial presentation of offerings reinforce hierarchy, cultural symbolism, and aesthetic balance. Historians still argue whether the exact positioning followed strict guild codes or evolved with practice, but the deliberate pacing is hypnotically soothing. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully aligns small beads along the edge of tray. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members believe that arranging items in particular patterns invited ancestral approval, a mix of ritual and attentive craft. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of repeated care guiding even these small details. A master glides along, adjusting placement subtly and offering soft gestures of guidance. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation and repeated hands-on practice, developing patience, focus, and delicate motor control. Historians still debate whether this method limited personal expression or strengthened continuity, but the quiet cadence is deeply relaxing. The air carries faint scents of metal, cloth, and polished surfaces, mingling with a subtle warmth from the afternoon sun. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling this combination helped them sense imperfections and maintain rhythm, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, measured breath, letting the sensory environment anchor your awareness. Children move carefully among benches, assisting with light tasks or observing quietly. Mainstream fact. Early involvement trained patience, observation, and coordination without risking damage to the delicate bronze pieces. Historians still argue whether this exposure was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their cautious presence contributes to the courtyard's calm, meditative energy. Soft, playful moments punctuate the solemn practice. A bead rolls slightly, prompting a gentle laugh. A whispered joke travels between apprentices. A tray is nudged gently into perfect alignment. Fringe tidbit. These minor interactions were recounted in oral stories as lessons about patience, humor, and focus. You let the quiet interplay of discipline and levity envelop your awareness. The sun dips lower, casting long amber reflections across bronzes, trays, and silk banners. Mainstream fact: ceremonial presentation of offerings ensured symbolic communication and aesthetic cohesion. Historians still debate whether small variations carried spiritual significance, but the slow, rhythmic preparation is mesmerizing and hypnotically soothing. A master taps lightly on a tray or bronze, confirming alignment, while apprentices hum softly during synchronized movement. Fringe tidbit: humming was believed to harmonize apprentice energy with the objects, blending ritual, attention, and mindfulness. You hum along quietly, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of ceremony and observation settle over your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, and now accompanied by meticulously arranged ceremonial offerings. Mainstream fact: this stage represents a culmination of craftsmanship, patience, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft light and rhythmic activity, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You wander to the courtyard's shaded corner, where apprentices are now rehearsing the gentle, methodical cleaning of ceremonial offerings and small decorative items. Each tray, bead, and miniature figure is handled with tender care, polished, and arranged as if performing its own quiet dance. Fringe tidbit: some casters whisper that softly speaking to these items while cleaning kept them content, though historians debate whether this was ritual, superstition, or meditative focus. You let your eyes drift over the slow, deliberate work, feeling the meditative rhythm deepen. Before fully immersing, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this calm historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining other listeners quietly following along in the same serene space. You notice apprentices brushing each item lightly, checking placement, and ensuring no speck of dust remains. Mainstream fact: careful maintenance of ceremonial offerings preserved both symbolic meaning and aesthetic harmony during formal events. Historians still argue whether specific cleaning rituals were codified or evolved through practical experience, but the slow, attentive motion is calming and hypnotic. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully adjusts a small bead, aligning it perfectly along the tray's edge. Fringe tidbit: whispers suggested that arranging items with subtle symmetry invited ancestral favor, blending spiritual belief with meticulous care. You smile quietly, imagining generations repeating these small, mindful gestures. A master moves among apprentices, lightly adjusting hands, posture, and tray placement without disrupting the quiet rhythm. Mainstream fact: apprenticeship emphasized observation and hands-on repetition, cultivating patience, precision, and sensory awareness. Historians still debate whether this method constrained creativity or reinforced craft continuity, but the gentle cadence is soothing. The air carries a faint mixture of warm metal, cloth fibers, and lingering smoke from the courtyard. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices claimed inhaling these combined scents improved focus and perception of minor imperfections. Those psychological factors likely played a role. You take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the sensory environment settle you further. Children move cautiously among benches, helping with minor adjustments or observing without interfering. Mainstream fact: early exposure trained fine motor skills, patience, and attention to detail while safeguarding delicate ceremonial items. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their quiet attentiveness enhances the courtyard's meditative energy. Soft, playful moments punctuate the care. A bead rolls, prompting a soft laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A gentle nudge aligns a tray perfectly. Fringe tidbit: these minor interactions were recounted in oral stories, emphasizing patience, humor, and observational skill. You allow the interplay of careful work and lightheartedness to envelop your awareness. The sun lowers, casting warm amber tones across polished bronzes, trays, and banners. Mainstream fact: meticulous cleaning preserves ceremonial integrity, ensuring symbolic and aesthetic balance. Historians still debate whether minor gestures carried spiritual weight, but observing the deliberate, rhythmic care is hypnotically soothing. A master taps lightly on a tray or figure, confirming alignment, while apprentices hum softly during synchronized movement. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize human energy with the object's presence. You hum quietly along, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of ritual, observation, and gentle human care settle over you. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, handled with care, accompanied by ceremonial offerings now meticulously cleaned and arranged. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies patience, skill, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but in the soft light and rhythmic activity, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's quiet edge where apprentices are now rehearsing the subtle act of guiding visitors' eyes through the display. Each bronze figure, polished and mounted, sits among banners, cushions, and ceremonial offerings, forming a deliberate visual narrative. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that directing attention pleased the spirits by showing respect to each figure, though historians debate whether this was symbolic or practical etiquette. You follow the slow, gentle movements, feeling your breathing align with the calm rhythm of the courtyard. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this tranquil historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining other viewers quietly following the same meditative observation. You notice apprentices guiding the eyes subtly, tilting plaques, pausing near prominent figures, and creating a flowing sequence for observers. Mainstream fact. Guiding attention ensured that ceremonial displays communicated hierarchy, narrative, and symbolism effectively. Historians still argue whether this was strictly codified or allowed minor personal interpretation, but observing the measured care is calming and hypnotic. Nearby, a young apprentice gently shifts a leopard plaque, ensuring its gaze aligns with the surrounding figures. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members believe that the direction of each gaze connected the spirits across the display, blending symbolic belief with careful arrangement. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of repeated, attentive guidance shaping each ceremonial presentation. A master glides slowly among apprentices, offering subtle adjustments to hand placement, gaze alignment, and pacing. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation and repeated practice, cultivating focus, patience, and refined attention to subtle cues. Historians still debate whether this method limited creativity or strengthened guild consistency, but the quiet cadence is deeply soothing. The air carries faint metallic warmth mingled with cloth and dust, underscored by soft humming. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that inhaling these aromas sharpen visual awareness and spatial precision, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the sensory details ground your presence. Children move cautiously among benches, practicing subtle gestures themselves or observing quietly. Mainstream fact. Early involvement trained observation, coordination, and patience without risking delicate bronze work. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their careful attention contributes to the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the practice. A hand wavers slightly, prompting a gentle laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A figure is nudged into precise alignment. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were recounted in oral anecdotes emphasizing humor, patience, and observational skill. You allow the gentle mixture of diligence and levity to envelop your awareness. The late afternoon sun casts long amber reflections across bronzes, silk banners, and ceremonial offerings. Mainstream fact. Guiding attention enhanced storytelling hierarchy and ceremonial integrity. Historians still debate whether minor variations carried symbolic meaning, but observing the rhythmic, deliberate flow is hypnotically soothing. A master taps lightly on a figure or banner, signaling precise timing, while apprentices hum softly to maintain coordination. Fringe tidbit. Humming was thought to harmonize practitioner energy with the bronzes, blending ritual and mindful focus. You hum quietly along, letting the slow, gentle cadence of observation and ceremonial flow settle your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings, and now arranged with deliberate guidance of the eye. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies the culmination of craftsmanship, patience, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but in the soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's far corner, where apprentices are now rehearsing the gentle, ritualistic sequence of retreating after presentation. Each bronze figure, banners, cushions, and ceremonial offerings are carefully observed, then slowly returned to a neutral stance, as if pausing to breathe along with the apprentices. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that this slow withdrawal honored the spirit's rest, though historians debate whether it was symbolic or practical protocol. You follow the soft, measured steps, feeling the calm rhythm settle deeper within you. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the serene exploration of history, and share your location and local time, picturing fellow listeners quietly experiencing the same tranquil process. You notice apprentices stepping deliberately, ensuring each figure remains aligned, banners flutter softly, and offerings stay undisturbed. Mainstream fact. Ceremonial retreat ensured that figures and objects were preserved, visually coherent, and symbolically respected after presentation. Historians still argue whether this sequence followed strict guild codification or allowed personal discretion, but the slow, mindful pace is soothing. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully returns a leopard plaque to its original stance. Fringe tidbit. Some guild members whisper that returning each figure with slight bows maintained ancestral favor, blending ritual, mindfulness, and disciplined gesture. You smile quietly, imagining generations practicing this measured withdrawal. A master glides between benches, lightly guiding posture, steps, and hand positioning. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation, repeated practice, and subtle correction, fostering focus, patience, and deliberate motion. Historians still debate whether this method restricted creativity or reinforced guild continuity, but the quiet cadence is hypnotically relaxing. The air carries soft metallic warmth, mingled with cloth, polished bronze, and faint smoke from nearby furnaces. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claimed inhaling this scent improved timing and awareness, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, measured breath, letting the sensory details root you in the courtyard's calm. Children move cautiously, following a measured retreat or observing quietly. Mainstream fact. Early exposure trained coordination, patience, and spatial awareness without disturbing delicate ceremonial objects. Historians still debate whether this was formal teaching or practical necessity, but their gentle presence reinforces the courtyard's meditative ambience. Soft, playful moments punctuate the ritual. A slight stumble corrected with quiet laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A figure is adjusted with a careful nudge. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were recorded in oral anecdotes, teaching lessons in humor, patience, and attention. You let the subtle interplay of discipline and levity settle comfortably over your awareness. The sun dips lower, bathing bronzes, banners, and offerings in a warm, amber glow. Mainstream fact. Ceremonial withdrawal preserved visual harmony, symbolic meaning, and structural integrity. Historians still debate whether minor gestures carried spiritual weight, but observing the slow, rhythmic sequence is hypnotically calming. A master taps lightly on a figure or tray, signaling proper position, while apprentices hum softly to maintain rhythm. Fringe tidbit. Humming was thought to harmonize practitioner energy with the objects, blending ritual, attention, and mindfulness. You hum quietly along, letting the gentle cadence of ritual and observation envelop your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings, and now return to neutral positions with measured reverence. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's quiet center where apprentices are now rehearsing the final inspection of each bronze figure and ceremonial setup. The air is warm and still, carrying faint metallic and cloth aromas that mingle with soft sunlight. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that a final, silent glance at each figure acknowledged its spirit, though historians debate whether this was symbolic reverence or careful quality control. You follow their slow, deliberate movements, feeling a gentle calm settle over your awareness. Before immersing fully, remember familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this soothing historical journey. And share your location and local time. Picturing fellow listeners quietly following the same peaceful inspection. You notice apprentices circling the bronzes, pausing to inspect patina, polish, and alignment. Mainstream fact. Final inspection ensured ceremonial accuracy, durability, and visual coherence. Historians still argue whether minor adjustments followed strict guild codification or were left to individual discretion. But the quiet, attentive process is hypnotically relaxing. Nearby, a young apprentice lifts a leopard plaque slightly, observing light and shadow across its surface. Fringe tidbit. Whispers suggested that if the bronze looked content under soft sunlight, it indicated approval from ancestors, blending ritual with careful observation. You smile quietly, imagining centuries of repeated attention shaping both craft and ceremonial tradition. A master glides between apprentices, offering subtle guidance and gentle corrections. Mainstream fact. Apprentices learn primarily through observation, repetition, and careful feedback, cultivating patience, focus, and acute attention to detail. Historians still debate whether this method limited creative expression or reinforced continuity, but the calm cadence is deeply soothing. The air hums with soft metallic tones, cloth brushing, and faint smoke from distant furnaces. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that inhaling this combination sharpened their perceptual awareness, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a long, deliberate breath, letting the sensory environment anchor you further. Children move cautiously among benches, observing or gently assisting. Mainstream fact. Early involvement trained fine motor skills, patience, and attentiveness without risking delicate bronze pieces. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their quiet presence enhances the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the final inspection. A plaque slightly misaligned, eliciting a soft laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A gentle nudge corrects a tray. Fringe tidbit. These minor interactions were recorded in oral traditions as lessons in patience, humor, and observational skill. You allow the gentle interplay of diligence and levity to settle around you. The late afternoon sun casts long, golden reflections across polished bronzes, banners, and offerings. Mainstream fact. The final inspection ensured that all ceremonial and aesthetic standards were met. Historians still debate whether subtle gestures carried symbolic meaning, but observing the slow, meticulous process is hypnotically calming. A master taps lightly on a figure or tray, signaling alignment, while apprentices hum softly to maintain synchronized attention. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize practitioner energy with the bronzes, blending ritual, mindfulness, and focused care. You hum quietly along, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of ritual and observation lull your awareness. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings, and now fully inspected and aligned. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies a culmination of patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but in the soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's quiet perimeter where apprentices are now rehearsing the subtle, final polishing touches on the bronzes and ceremonial accessories. Each figure, tray, and banner receives one last gentle stroke, as if the objects themselves are being ready to rest. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that the final polish sealed the spirit's contentment, though historians debate whether this is symbolic or simply meticulous craftsmanship. You watch the slow, deliberate motions, feeling your breathing align with the gentle rhythm of care. Before fully immersing, Remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this calming historical journey. And share your location and local time, picturing fellow listeners quietly following the same meditative process. You notice apprentices moving softly, adjusting angles, and brushing surfaces with painstaking attention. Mainstream fact: the final polish enhanced both the aesthetic appearance and ceremonial significance of the bronzes. Historians still argue whether small gestures during this stage carry codified meaning or evolve naturally with practice, but the slow, meticulous work is hypnotically soothing. Nearby, a young apprentice delicately smooths a leopard plaque, watching sunlight dance across its curves. Fringe tidbit: whispers suggested that observing how light reflected off polished surfaces could reveal ancestral favor, blending ritual mindfulness with keen visual attention. You smile quietly, imagining generations repeating these final, attentive gestures. A master glides quietly among apprentices, offering subtle guidance and corrections without disturbing the calm flow. Mainstream fact: apprenticeship relied on observation, repetition, and gentle feedback to cultivate patience, focus, and dexterity. Historians still debate whether this method limited personal expression or strengthened guild continuity, but the measured cadence is deeply relaxing. The air carries a soft metallic warmth mingled with cloth and faint lingering smoke from furnaces. Fringe tidbit: some apprentices claim that inhaling this subtle mixture heightened perception and attention to detail, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a long, slow breath, letting the sensory atmosphere ground you in the courtyard's calm. Children move cautiously, mimicking gentle strokes or quietly observing. Mainstream fact: early involvement trained coordination, focus, and patience without risking damage to delicate bronze pieces. Historians still debate whether this exposure was formal teaching or practical necessity, but their careful presence reinforces the courtyard's meditative ambience. Soft, playful moments punctuate the final polish. A tiny smudge corrected with a quiet laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A gentle nudge aligns a tray or plaque. Fringe tidbit: these interactions were recorded in oral stories as lessons in humor, attentiveness, and subtle skill. You let the quiet interplay of diligence and levity envelop your awareness. The sunlight softens, casting long amber reflections across bronzes, banners, and ceremonial offerings. Mainstream fact: the final polish ensured aesthetic harmony and ceremonial readiness. Historians still debate whether minor gestures carried spiritual significance, but observing the slow, rhythmic motions is hypnotically calming. A master taps lightly on a figure or tray to signal perfection, while apprentices hum softly to maintain cadence. Fringe tidbit: humming was believed to harmonize energy between practitioner and object, blending ritual, mindfulness, and focused attention. You hum quietly along, letting the slow, deliberate rhythm of care and observation lull your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings, and now perfected with gentle final touches. Mainstream fact: this stage embodies a culmination of patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivation, but in the soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's quiet benches where apprentices are now rehearsing the careful, ceremonial packing and temporary storage of bronzes and associated items. Each figure is placed in protective mats or cushion trays, ensuring no scratches, dents, or misalignments occur. Fringe tidbit: some casters whisper that wrapping bronzes kept the spirits comfortable during rest, though historians debate whether this was symbolic ritual or practical preservation. You follow the measured motions, letting the rhythm of care deepen your sense of calm. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this soothing historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow listeners quietly following the same gentle process. You notice apprentices carefully lifting each bronze, adjusting angle and pressure, and ensuring protective padding is correctly positioned. Mainstream fact: ceremonial packing preserved both the physical integrity and aesthetic appeal of bronzes during storage or transport. Historians still argue whether rapping practices followed strict codification or evolved with practical experience, but the deliberate, slow movements are hypnotically relaxing. Nearby, a young apprentice gently adjusts cushions beneath a leopard plaque, ensuring stability. Fringe tidbit. Whisper suggested that precise placement communicated respect to ancestral spirits, blending ritual mindfulness with careful handling. You smile quietly, imagining generations practicing the slow, deliberate care. A master glides quietly among apprentices, offering subtle corrections in hand positioning, padding arrangement and alignment. Mainstream fact. Apprenticeship emphasized observation, repetition, and gentle feedback to cultivate patience, dexterity, and meticulous attention. Historians still debate whether this method restricted creativity or reinforced gill consistency, but the calm cadence is soothing. The air carries soft metallic warmth, mixed with cloth and faint smoke lingering from nearby furnaces. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claimed inhaling this combination sharpened focus on delicate motions, though psychological suggestion likely contributed. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the sensory details ground your awareness in the courtyard's quiet rhythm. Children move carefully, assisting lightly or observing without interference. Mainstream fact. Early exposure trained coordination, attention, and spatial awareness without risking damage to delicate bronze items. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their quiet attentiveness enhances the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate packing. A cushion slightly slips, prompting a quiet laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A tray is nudged gently back into position. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were recorded in oral traditions as lessons in patience, humor, and subtle skill. You allow the gentle mix of diligence and lightheartedness to settle over your awareness. The sun softens further, casting warm amber reflections across bronzes, banners, and cushioned trays. Mainstream fact. Careful packing preserves ceremonial objects' integrity and aesthetic balance. Historians still debate whether subtle gestures carried spiritual weight, but the slow, rhythmic motions are hypnotically soothing. A master taps lightly on a tray or figure to confirm stability, while apprentices hum softly to maintain rhythm. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize energy between practitioner and bronze, blending ritual, mindfulness, and careful attention. You hum quietly along, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of packing and observation lull your awareness. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings, and now secure with meticulous packing. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies a culmination of patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift to the courtyard's corner where apprentices are now rehearsing the careful cataloging and record-keeping of each bronze, tray, and ceremonial accessory. Each item is noted, its position, characteristics, and subtle variations documented in soft-covered ledgers. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that meticulous records honor the spirit's memory, though historians debate whether this was spiritual practice or practical administration. You follow the measured pace of writing and notation, feeling a gentle rhythm settle over you. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this calming historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow listeners quietly participating in the same gentle documentation. You notice apprentices moving slowly from bronze to bronze, making careful observations, and recording details in neat, precise script. Mainstream fact. Accurate record-keeping preserves knowledge of materials, techniques, and ceremonial significance, ensuring continuity across generations. Historians still argue whether the records primarily served practical inventory purposes or carried ritual weight, but the deliberate, calm motions are soothing. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully notes a subtle patina on a leopard plaque, comparing it to earlier observations. Fringe tidbit. Whisper suggested that certain markings or variations indicated ancestral approval, blending documentation with mindful reflection. You smile quietly, imagining generations repeating the careful recording of minute details. A master glides quietly among apprentices, gently pointing out subtleties in bronze texture, engraving, and hue. Mainstream fact. Apprenticeship emphasized observation, repetition, and careful guidance, cultivating patience, precision, and acute attention to detail. Historians still debate whether this method constrained creativity or reinforced guild continuity, but the steady cadence is calming. The air carries soft metallic warmth mingled with a faint aroma of ink, paper, and polished surfaces. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that the combination enhanced focus and memory, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the sensory environment anchor you in the calm of the courtyard. Children move cautiously among benches, practicing careful notation or quietly observing. Mainstream fact. Early exposure trained coordination, attentiveness, and methodical thinking without compromising delicate bronzes. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or practical necessity, but their gentle presence enhances the meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the cataloging. A pencil slips, eliciting a quiet laugh. A whispered joke passes between apprentices. A ledger is nudged gently into place. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were recorded in oral traditions as lessons in patience, humor, and careful observation. You let the subtle interplay of diligence and levity settle comfortably over your awareness. The sun casts warm reflections across polished bronzes, silk banners, and neatly arranged ledgers. Mainstream fact. Careful cataloging ensured accurate documentation, continuity, and ceremonial integrity. Historians still debate whether subtle notations carried symbolic meaning, but the slow, rhythmic motions are hypnotically calming. A master taps lightly on a ledger or figure, signaling completion, while apprentices hum softly to maintain a quiet rhythm. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize energy between practitioner, bronze, and documentation, blending ritual, mindfulness, and focus. You hum quietly along, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of observation, notation, and ritual lull your awareness. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings packed and now meticulously cataloged. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies a culmination of patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft, rhythmic light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift to the courtyard's far side where apprentices are now rehearsing the gentle ritual of communal reflection and storytelling about the day's work. Each apprentice takes a quiet moment to recount what they learned, observed, or struggled with while handling the bronzes and ceremonial items. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that sharing reflections kept ancestral spirits pleased, though historians debate whether this was spiritual practice or simply an oral pedagogical method. You follow the soft, measured cadence of voices, feeling a calm, reflective rhythm settle over you. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this soothing historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow listeners quietly participating in the same gentle storytelling. You notice apprentices speaking softly, recounting each detail of handling, polishing, and arranging, while others listen attentively. Mainstream fact. Communal reflection reinforced memory, craftsmanship skills, and attention to ceremonial protocol. Historians still argue whether the practice carried spiritual significance or was purely educational, but the slow, deliberate sharing is hypnotically calming. Nearby, a young apprentice recounts a small observation about a leopard plaque, noting subtle differences in patina from prior days. Fringe tidbit. Whispers suggested that noticing these tiny changes could signal ancestral guidance, blending ritual mindfulness with careful observation. You smile quietly, imagining generations passing down both stories and subtle lessons. A master glide between groups, offering gentle prompts or clarifying observations. Mainstream fact. Reflection and discussion helped apprentices internalize skills, understand hierarchies, and strengthen attention to detail. Historians still debate whether oral storytelling restricted innovation or fostered continuity, but the calm rhythm of dialogue soothes your mind. The air carries soft metallic warmth mingled with faint ink and cloth aromas from ledgers and polished bronzes. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices claim that inhaling this mixture enhanced focus during reflection, though psychological suggestion likely played a role. You take a slow, measured breath, letting the sensory atmosphere settle you in the courtyard's calm. Children move quietly, sharing observations or gently assisting in minor demonstrations. Mainstream fact. Early participation in reflective storytelling trained memory, patience, and analytical thinking. Historians still debate whether this was formal teaching or practical reinforcement, but their quiet presence contributes to the meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate reflection, a whispered joke, a gentle laugh, or a small anecdote from a master. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were recorded orally to teach patience, humor, and focus. You allow the gentle interplay of reflection, diligence, and levity to envelop your awareness. The sun lowers, casting warm, amber light across bronzes, banners, and attentive apprentices. Mainstream fact. Communal reflection reinforced skills, hierarchy, and craftsmanship continuity. Historians still debate whether minor rituals carried spiritual weight, but observing the slow, thoughtful dialogue is hypnotically soothing. A master taps lightly on a bronze or tray, signaling closure, while apprentices hum softly to maintain a gentle rhythm. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize the energy of practitioner, object, and mind, blending ritual, mindfulness, and reflective focus. You hum quietly along, letting the calm, deliberate cadence of storytelling and ritual envelop your mind. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings packed, cataloged, and now enriched with reflective storytelling. Mainstream fact. This stage embodies patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft, reflective light, you feel calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. You drift toward the courtyard's final quiet space where apprentices are now settling into gentle rest after the day's meticulous work. The bronzes, trays, and ceremonial offerings stand polished, aligned, and cataloged, bathed in the soft glow of late sunlight. Fringe tidbit. Some casters whisper that a final moment of silence honored the spirit's satisfaction, though historians debate whether this was spiritual practice or simply a pause to ensure completeness. You let your attention linger on the still, peaceful scene, feeling a calmness that seeps deep into your awareness. Before immersing fully, remember the familiar ritual. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this soothing historical journey. And share your location and local time, imagining fellow listeners quietly observing the same serene conclusion. You notice apprentices stretching lightly, exchanging soft smiles, and moving slowly toward benches. Mainstream fact. Concluding the day with a ritual pause reinforced mindfulness, respect for materials, and continuity of craftsmanship. Historians still argue whether these final moments were ceremonial, practical, or a combination of both, but the gentle pacing is hypnotically calming. Nearby, a young apprentice glances one last time at a leopard plaque, observing its gleam and alignment. Fringe tidbit. Whispers suggested that final acknowledgement assured ancestral favor for tomorrow's work, blending ritual awareness with careful craftsmanship. You smile quietly, imagining generations taking similar pauses in their daily rhythm. A master moves slowly among the apprentices, offering quiet nods or soft guidance. Mainstream fact. Closing rituals reinforce attention to detail, reflective practice, and discipline. Historians still debate whether this reinforced hierarchy or fostered communal mindfulness, but the quiet cadence is deeply soothing. The air is warm, carrying soft metallic and cloth scents, with a faint memory of smoke from earlier work. Fringe tidbit. Some apprentices believe that inhaling this final combination signaled completion and readiness for rest, though psychological suggestion likely contributed. You take a deep, slow breath, letting the sensory details anchor you in the courtyard's calm. Children move softly toward benches, settling in, reflecting, or quietly chatting. Mainstream fact. Early participation in concluding rituals train patience, attentiveness, and contemplative observation. Historians still debate whether this was formal pedagogy or informal tradition, but their gentle presence enhances the courtyard's meditative atmosphere. Soft, playful moments punctuate the final pause, a quiet laugh, a whispered anecdote, or gentle gestures exchanged among apprentices. Fringe tidbit. These interactions were preserved in oral traditions as lessons in humor, patience, and subtle skill. You allow the interplay of rest, reflection, and lightheartedness to envelop your awareness. The sun dips toward the horizon, casting long amber reflections across polished bronzes, silk banners, and neatly arranged trays. Mainstream fact. The final moment of the day preserved ceremonial integrity, visual harmony, and reflective practice. Historians still debate whether minor gestures carried spiritual significance, but observing the slow, deliberate closure is hypnotically soothing. A master taps lightly on a figure or tray to signal completion, while apprentices hum softly in quiet synchronization. Fringe tidbit. Humming was believed to harmonize energy between practitioner, bronze, and courtyard, blending ritual, mindfulness, and gentle focus. You hum along quietly, letting the calm, deliberate rhythm lull your mind and body. Finally, your gaze drifts across the courtyard. Bronze is polished, patinated, mounted, cushioned, adorned, carefully handled, accompanied by ceremonial offerings, packed, cataloged, enriched with reflection, and now resting in serene harmony. Mainstream fact. This final stage embodies a culmination of patience, precision, and ceremonial mastery. Historians still debate spiritual versus practical motivations, but in the soft, settling light, you feel deeply calm, immersed, and gently transported into Benin's enduring craft tradition. The courtyard settles into a gentle hush as you sink into the rhythm of completion. Bronzes glimmer softly in the waning light. Banners flutter quietly in a slow, almost imperceptible breeze, and every carefully placed tray seems to exhale alongside the apprentices. Your breathing matches the slow cadence of the serene space, and for a moment, time itself feels suspended. You notice how the smallest details, the tilt of a leopard plaque, the subtle gleam of polished metal, the arrangement of beads, contribute to a larger harmony that stretches across generations. You feel a profound calm as you imagine the hands that shaped each figure, the quiet dedication, and the patience required to maintain such perfection. The gentle hum of apprentices, the soft rustle of cloth, and the faint lingering scent of metal blend into a soothing symphony of human attention and careful craftsmanship. Fringe details and whispered rituals no longer feel obscure. They are threads weaving a quiet tapestry of presence, mindfulness, and reverence for work well done. As you let your gaze drift across the courtyard, you sense a continuum. The past, the present, and the careful care that ensures the future of this craft. Every subtle motion, every measured pause, every small laugh now folds into the soft embrace of evening. You feel your shoulders relax, your mind quiet, and a slow, gentle contentment wash over you. Let yourself linger in this space, breathing in harmony with centuries of care, patience, and ritual. Let the soft amber light, polished bronzes, and quiet hum of the courtyard carry you into a gentle rest. Your awareness drifts untethered, ready to glide into dreamlike reflections of craftsmanship, history, and enduring patience.